This conference will now be recorded.
Do you want somebody else to watch the chat so that way?
That would be awesome. If someone could volunteer to do that, and then if there are like questions, kind of let me know that there are questions there. That would be extremely helpful. Thank you. Are you volunteering?
Sure.
Thanks. Okay. So again, when Susan does this, we always kind of start with the history, and I think it's important to kind of know. So we have our mission statement here for Safe Place that really describes what it does. And Safe Place began in Louisville back in 1983, and they have a shelter there that was part of the YMCA, and Safe Place Services is the shelter that's still there and still runs the Safe Place program in Louisville. But back then there was a lot of attention on runaway youth. And they were actually the shelter was getting a lot of calls from kids. And you guys been to Louisville, but Louisville's pretty big. It's really spread out. And they were actually having a hard time getting the kids, and the shelter at that time was downtown in what they call Old Louisville. And so kids were having a hard time actually getting to the shelter, but they still needed help. And so they'd call the shelter. And so the director at that time came up with this idea of creating safe places within the community where kids could go, immediately be safe, and then that Safe Place site would call the shelter and they would come out and pick up the child. And so that's just kind of how Safe Place was born in Louisville. They still, obviously, that's where NSPN still is in Louisville, Kentucky. And it didn't take very long before it got attention and began to spread. So it began in 1983 in Louisville. I think, they expected, a handful of kids. They ended up with like 80 something the first year that they started this. And I hope that that's right. But it was close to that if it wasn't. But they did get a lot more kids than they expected to have. They started to talk about what they were doing, and it started to spread. It came to Indiana in 1987, and both Crisis Center up in Gary and South Bend were early programs. I think maybe the Monroe County program was right around that same time. And so, we're right in there next. So, and it just kind of grew and became this national program. It's now a 501c3 that happened back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. But they still kind of are really closely associated with the Y down there in Louisville. And so across the nation, it is a big program. I have to update this frequently, and these numbers always change. I did this presentation probably maybe 2 months ago. And so at that time, there were 36 states and the District of Columbia that have Safe Place programs in over communities, and nationwide there are nearly 2,000 or 20,000 Safe Place sites. In Indiana specific, we have 18 and a new program coming on, programs that cover 33 counties, and we have nearly 2,000 sites in Indiana. Okay, so really briefly, and we'll go over this a lot more when we cover procedures, but any young person can walk into a store that has that Safe Place sign that's designated and ask for help. At that point, those site employees are trained, and they have a procedure sheet, so they know what to do, which is to call the host agency and share whatever information they have about that young person. The agency will send out either a volunteer or a staff person to meet that young person. They will, the agency, if they're sending a staff, they can say, okay, so, Jane's coming out and she should be there within 20 minutes. If they have to find a volunteer, and there aren't very many programs anymore that use volunteers, but if they would say, okay, let me find a volunteer, I'll call you back and let you know who's coming, they would again still call that site back and let the site know who's coming out to meet with that young person. Once they go out, they will sit down with the kid, and they'll talk about what's going on, and they'll talk about what the options are, and that young person can choose what they would like to do. If they want to go back to the shelter or a host home, they're then transported back. And at that point, shelter care kind of takes over and Safe Place ends. So that's just a really brief rundown. We'll get into more of those details when we go over procedures, but that's just like a really quick overview. One of the things that you guys are required to do, and we'll go over this, is outreach. Kids learn about the program through presentations, by going out and doing PSAs or radio announcements. Most of the time kids learn through those face-to-face presentations or through PSAs at the school, although we do have lots of technology now with social media. And this is a program that is unlike a lot of other youth programs, this type of youth program, and the kids talk about this, and they actually will recommend their friends to use the Safe Place program if they need that. All right, so the components, we will again kind of just briefly go over this. The first one is that crisis intervention. And so you have to have a 24-hour immediate response. That means that someone's answering that phone 24/7. It can be the shelter, it can be an on-call phone that rotates, but there is a live person at the other end of that phone whenever a young person calls. And then you have to have the ability to either provide services or make referrals to services. And this can be whatever works for your agencies. We have agencies that have counselors on staff and they provide the service, and we have agencies who refer out with and have partnerships with counseling programs to provide those services. And then you also do have to have that residential component. And so that's going to be your host home or your youth shelter. Kids won't use the program unless they know about the program. I worked for NSP for about, I don't know, from 2008 to 2013. And, we'd get calls from agencies and kids aren't using, we'd have whatever calls or we'd have meetings and they would say, kids aren't using our program. And then I go look at their outreach numbers and they're not talking about the program. It goes hand in hand. It really, really does. So if you're not talking about the Safe Place program and kids don't know about it, and they're not going to use it. So outreach is huge, and it's going to be really important to get out there and to be repetitive because kids get familiar with you. And if you've been on this for a while, you become the Safe Place lady in the community.
Yes.
You'll be at the mall. You'll be minding your own business at the mall, going grocery shopping, and hey, it's the Safe Place lady.
Yeah, I've gotten that.
Yeah, that used to drive my son crazy. He'd, especially my oldest, he'd be so embarrassed. I'm like, dude, whatever. But that familiarity means that kids are going to be more likely to use the program when they need it, that you'll come to mind, that you are a safe, the program is safe because they know you and you're safe. So outreach is really, really important. So making sure that you're out there talking to the kids, and if you go out every year and you're seeing the same kids, and a lot of times you will see the same kids 2 or 3 years in a row. That's fine because that just builds that familiarity and that comfort level with you and the program and your agency. So you're doing that. You'll do community outreach, also adult outreach, and we'll talk about those a little bit more. But that's just so adults can make those referrals as well, and that's so you can garner support. Site responsibilities. So, we'll talk again, all of this stuff we're going to talk about in more detail, but, that you do have the Safe Place sites. So you guys can see this stuff. You'll have this. I have the whole section of the operations manual about sites that we'll go over and talk specifically about what the requirements are for Safe Place sites and how to find those things. And the things that you need to keep in mind when you're looking for sites, and then also checking those sites once a year to make sure that they have everything that they need, that everybody's trained. The last thing you want is for a kid to show up at a Safe Place site and they don't know what to do, or they call the cops because they don't know what to do. That's happened, when I ran the program here in Bloomington for, I don't know, however many years I ran the program here. And you know what? I assumed you guys all know who I am, but I probably should introduce myself and give you a little bit of background. I just now realized that. So if you don't know, my name is Robin Donaldson. I am the Chief Operations Officer at Indiana Youth Service Association, and I have been there, it'd be 7 years, gosh, 7 years in June. Before that, I did spend 5 years working for National Safe Place. I was the Program Development and Research Director down there at NSP. Love this program. I fell in love with the program when I went to my first New Safe Place Coordinator training way back in, I don't know, 1998 or 9 or something like that. And I had been working at the youth shelter in Bloomington for quite a few years. I started as a counselor, and I knew that we had this program called Safe Place, but our agency at the time didn't do a very good job talking about Safe Place and what it was. And so I knew it, I knew there was something called Safe Place, but I had no idea what it was. I was a counselor, and I had no idea what it was. And then when I became the clinical coordinator, Safe Place became part of my responsibility. And absolutely fell in love with the program. So I've been actually involved with Safe Place for over, gosh, time flies, over 20 years now. First as a coordinator, and when I took over the program, it was in sad shape. In fact, we were getting ready to lose our state funding because the program was in such poor shape. And I went to the training and was completely overwhelmed, but also really excited because there's a lot to do with Safe Place, but it was so cool. It was such a cool program. And so I ran that program in Bloomington. At the time we had Bloomington and Greene County. So I had 2 counties, and Greene's very, very rural. And then when I moved to the assistant director position at the shelter, the Safe Place program stayed with the clinical coordinator. And so I was on the National Safe Place Advisory Board. And so I was on that advisory board for about 7 years until I started working at NSP. So lots of involvement in lots of different ways. Indiana IYSA is the only state, so our association is the only state that has a license agreement with National Safe Place to run the program for the states and run the programs for those agencies in Indiana. So you guys get some benefit, like being able to do this. We have our quarterly meetings for the coordinators. You get lots of training that maybe otherwise you might not get around that, instead of having to go to Louisville and spend $500 just to go to the training, and that doesn't count your travel cost or your hotel cost. For the new coordinators, we bring Susan up here usually to do this, or you get me to do this at this point. And so I say that all of this so that you guys understand I have a little bit of experience with the Safe Place program. And I have lots of, not only things that worked for me, but also, especially, being on the advisory board and working at National, hearing what works for all of the programs across the country. So lots of ideas to share with you guys. So don't hesitate to ask. And when we get to the database, I actually was at NSP when the database was created, so I kind of feel like that NSP database is mine. It's my baby. So I have lots of experience with that there. So never hesitate to ask questions about that. Any of this.
And I just wanted to add, I don't need the new orientation training. I wanted to participate in some of this in the event anyone needed, I don't know, my expertise, I guess, because I've been at this for way too long. Anyway, I'm just so if I can share anything or answer any questions, that's why I'm doing this, but only for a little while, maybe, I don't know, another half hour or so.
And we will have other coordinators who've been doing this for a while join us. I think that, we have some current coordinators going to be jumping on those types of things. And Crystal's been doing it for a little bit. I know, you still consider yourself new, and Yvonne's been doing this for a little bit as well. So having that experience, I think, is, if you guys have questions, ask those. If you have ideas to share,
Mm-hmm.
this, I I know probably what's going to happen is I'm going to end up talking pretty much all day. I don't want to be the one talking all day. So you guys have questions. If you have ideas to share, please jump in at any time. And I also say that, normally if we were all together, I would tell you, if you got to get up and go to the bathroom, you need to go get something to drink, just do that, do that as you need to. So and we will kind of take breaks. Remind me, I was like drilling in my head, okay, you got to remember to give breaks, whatever. So we will kind of break it up a little bit. We won't be sitting here for hours and hours on end. All right.
You don't get Jimmy John's today.
We do not get Jimmy John's today. You are welcome to order Jimmy John's for yourself.
I thought you were going to be really tricky and just send it to everybody wherever they're at.
Oh, that would be cool.
And I started to order Jimmy John's in memory of our face-to-faces. I was like, I should get Jimmy John's today.
So for all of you new people, when we get together, we usually have Jimmy John's for lunch. That's what is quick and easy. All right, so we have the site coordination and the site checks. We also have the program coordination, basically meaning that someone at your agency is going to be the one person responsible for making sure all this stuff gets done. And so that includes, the outreach, and you don't have to do it all. So, but you're just making sure that it gets done.
So I have a question with the outreach now in our new way of living, or however it is. How is that going? Like, are the expectations going to be a little bit different or anything, or lowered because, like schools being canceled for half the year this, or, like this whole time, and then possibly next year, who knows?
Yeah.
Or does anybody have any ideas how we can do outreach?
Can I offer something, Robin?
Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
What we were already working on anyway was doing fewer classroom presentations and asking corporations to present like an all-school video, Safe Place video, and we also offer other pieces of information, our list of sites and so forth, because we find we can reach more kids that way. And that was actually in reaction to teachers telling us they have less time now for presenters because there's so much, they're so involved with testing and so forth. But now fast forward to our new reality, and we're working with corporations on having, instead of the all school video, obviously the kids aren't in school, but adding something to e-learning. So that, and actually everyone seems to be real excited about that because they're kind of running out of, lessons and things to present to kids. So we're working on having two major school corporations add something to their e-learning, hopefully before school ends, so that kids will be ready for that summer break. And if they need the crisis intervention, they'll know about us and how to get help.
What's that going to look like, Jane?
What you mean in terms of the e-learning? What will that look like for the kids?
Yeah, what would they,
Well, for example, either the Safe Place video or the APSA would be shown, along with, we prepared some PowerPoints to explain Safe Place and Safe Station. They would see that first, then a PSA, and then a list of Safe Place sites in their area. And I also prepared a list of frequently asked questions, so they'll get a little bit more than what they otherwise would have. And it's kind of like a one package deal, and it won't run for, I don't know, it'll run for maybe 20 minutes, almost a half hour of their time, and it would just be presented as an e-learning lesson.
So then are they doing a pre and post test? So then that way for the database information?
That will follow. We are still looking at how to make that happen. So we just want, you know, first and foremost, we want to get the word out there. We want that to happen first, and then we'll figure out how are we going to measure what the kids knew and what they versus what they now know.
Would
So,
that be, sorry, would that
go
be
ahead.
good then, Robin? Would that count and stuff then, or would that be? Yeah.
It would. So this is Amy, right? Because
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. What we had early on, gosh, when all of this stuff started, we had a pretty impromptu call with all of this coordinators about what we were going to do with this situation. And I know that not everyone was able to join because it was, you know, fairly short notice. But we talked about all of, you know, kind of outreach and what we could do. And, you know, what do you do about the sites that are closed? And, you know, hopefully they have the if closed call decal on there because, you know, a lot of our sites are non-essential. So we had that conversation, and we did talk about outreach, how we can do that virtually. You know, like Jane, you know, and what Jane talked about was one of the ideas. But the bottom line is the world is not the same as it was, you know, before March 2020. And we have to, I mean, it's just not, and that's just our new reality. And so those, as long as, you know, school's out and we're all still stay at home on the stay at home order and all that kind of stuff, I'm not going to cancel months. So, you know, let's say your goal is 2,400, reaching 2,400 kids. And if we divided that by 12 months, then that's what's 100. See, I knew what it was and I went easy so that I could do the math, and then yeah, it's 200 kids. Duh. All right. So that would be 200 kids a month, and we're out for 3 months. Then I'm just going to take 600 kids off the total of your expected, and that's just an example. But we'll kind of prorate it if that makes sense.
Okay.
And take out what, you know, these months that we're just, we can't. And if you still get there, you get there, and that's great. You know, we can be creative about how we're making sure kids still get that information, because this is probably a really important time for them to be able to get that help. But yes, we will definitely be more flexible and lenient around all of those outcomes and goals because of this. Now that's IYSA. I don't know what NSP is going to do.
Can I add something, Robin?
Mm-hmm.
So we are also doing something like we're sending a video to the schools for them to be able to use it, because we've talked to a lot of the schools in our area too, and they think it would be easier. Unfortunately for me, I have to have a self-recorded video of me doing it and give it to all of them so that they have a face to go with the coordinator that they work with, which I understand and I'm fine with, but I would much rather put it in Jan's court, and she's just not having it. She's gonna make me do it. But we are giving the teachers like an information packet, so if the kids have questions, they can try to answer them. And then we are also sending them with we're sending them with Safe Place cards, but we're also giving them like this is how many kids are in your class, how many said that they learned something, kind of a thing. Since we can't necessarily send a pre-post, we're doing how many of you have heard of it? Do you know anything about it? And then after it's done, how many of you learned something? That way we have some sort of data coming in from it, so we have at least a little bit of knowledge.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, and I was going to suggest, you guys just doing something like this and recording it and making it available. Because again, I think that face is, you know, as much as you may not like doing it, them being able to see the face and connecting that, it just makes people feel safer, and it makes kids feel safer. And so that would be a really good way. And, you know, GoTo and Zoom, they all have the now free access to be able to do this. So it is possible. And you can kind of, you know, record your presentation and put it out there. And some of these, you can actually show videos through a lot of these virtual access meetings sites stuff. So you can do it, and you can record it and make it available to them, or just give them the PSA or the Safe Place video, however you want to. But there's lots of ways that we can go about doing that. All right. So let's see, program coordination. So yeah, just making sure that all of this stuff gets done. Usually it is the coordinator who's entering the data in the database. It doesn't have to be, but we can talk about that a little bit more. And then if you are doing, does anyone use volunteers? Bridget, and Bridget joined us from Monroe County. She's been doing this for a while and has lots of resources and great ideas. So thank you for joining us, Bridget, so that you can share your expertise. But are you using volunteers in some of your rural counties?
We can't hear you, Bridget.
There she, yep. That's weird. Yeah, it says you're on, but we can't. You might have to call in. Is your microphone? It's not muted.
Is that any better?
There you go.
There we go. Just had to problem solve here. Sorry. I had two questions. So one thing I was just thinking, I don't know the e-learning platforms that schools are using that well, but I kind of wondered if there are features, because so many presentation platforms have some sort of survey ability. If we can ask it, or at least figure out and put the pre-post in the survey, like in a presentation. So then kids have clickable actions that they could use. So I'm kind of wondering about that. I just don't know enough about the e-learning platforms to know if that's a possibility, but then I would assume that would collect the data for you and then you would at least have it.
Yeah.
I've still got to figure out recording and all of that fun stuff too, but yeah, and then I forgot what the original question was.
Well, let me make a comment. It's about volunteers, but let me make, so I know that NCCASC uses Canvas, and Canvas is a pretty popular e-learning platform. A lot of folks use it. Ivy Tech uses it. I'm in a doc program up through Adler University up in Chicago. They use Canvas, so it is really popular. Canvas. Yeah, and it does have the capability to have quizzes and to upload videos. So you actually on Canvas could create a whole unit, just like Jane was talking about, a learning unit with the pre-post, with the video. I mean, you could have handouts, you could do a lot of stuff with different mediums in one, like maybe kind of learning.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. I was like, and I'll bet whatever they're using has that ability because they want to show kids are participating. So that was my thought about those, is I bet there's the capability within the e-learning platform your schools are using.
Yep, there is.
Then, volunteers.
Yes.
So I've gotten them. Keeping people engaged is something different. I also, in my rural counties, who do I get? I get volunteers who are already doing everything anyway. My best source of volunteers was going to CASAs. That's who was really interested in doing this work already. And then they, since you aren't going to get calls all the time, and they're kind of already prepared for that anyway, we had a lot of success getting CASAs. Plus, they were already trained, and I was able to add their trainings, and it didn't put a lot on me. We still went through like our training, but they actually were more skilled in some of those areas than I was. They're more prepared, to be honest, because they've been doing it for a long time, and they do all the upkeep on all their trainings, and so they've had a lot of time in some of the areas that we really hope people that will have those skill sets. I think too, it put me at ease, just because when you're sending out somebody who's not from your agency, it's always a little scary, because you're hoping they have the skill set. And in our rural counties, it works different. So if that kid, so with us, the way that our agency works, they still have to go through like an approval to stay in our shelter. So if they want shelter, we still have to go through a process to make sure they're approved to stay. What we don't want to do is create a barrier for a family. If they decide they want shelter, we drive them all the way to our shelter, because I have 3 counties an hour away, to find out that they aren't able to stay with us, or they change their mind and the only person we can release them to is a parent, and then that parent has to figure out rides and so on and so forth to come get their kid an hour away. So there's a lot more problem solving in our outer counties and making sure we have volunteers who are prepared to kind of work with us on those. It's a challenge, but we get some, but you're usually is pulling from people who are already within that realm of understanding this population, the problems you may be seeing, and are comfortable enough to do that work. Because I have a lot of people that would tell me there's absolutely no way that they would do it. It's too stressful for them. So that was.
Yeah, we've lost coordinators because, you know, they respond to calls, and if they didn't have this background and this training, it was just too overwhelming. I think we don't realize that because we're in this field, but you know, to the layman who's not living this day to day, this can be kind of traumatic and draining. So CASAS is a great idea. When I was at NSP, we actually were pursuing and had an agreement with National CASA, and it's just really difficult to, even though we made the connection, we tried to make the connections between the local programs and the local CASA, it was up to them to follow up, and sometimes it didn't happen. But that's a great idea. All right, I'm not gonna, so you guys will have this is community benefit. I'm not gonna go into this, but you can kind of look through this one. And like I said, I sent this out, so everyone should have it. This is kind of the end of the implementation stuff. So I'm going to get out of here. I didn't make any changes. Never. Oh, just go. All right. Let me get in. Let's see. All right. So I want to start with the program implementation standards. So this is this comes directly from the Safe Place Operations Manual. It's kind of, it's an exhibit, so it's kind of down in this actual first chapter of the operations manual. But I think it's important for you guys to understand what has to happen in order for your Safe Place program to meet all of the implementation standards from NSP. And when so ultimately your Safe Place money that you get from the state, if you get Safe Place money from the state, I have 15 of the 18 programs that get state funding. They have, the state, DCS, Department of Child Services, has Safe Place service standards that pretty much follow the national implementation standards. And so not only are you required to follow this from NSP point of view, and your license agreement that you sign every year, whatever you pay for it, but also through the contract that you have with IYSA. So DCS gives us the money, and then we contract with you guys to run the Safe Place programs if you have that. If you don't have the Safe Place money, NSP still looks to IYSA to make sure that the agencies in Indiana are following those implementation standards as well. So you do have to have an identified Safe Place coordinator. That coordinator should work at least 10 hours a week. That doesn't have to be 10 hours every week. It's an average of 10 hours a week, because sometimes you're going to have a whole lot of Safe Place activity, and sometimes you're not going to have much. But as long as it averages about 10 hours a week, that's the expectation. Really, it is kind of the second bullet point here, adequate staff time to achieve the agreed upon goals. so that you're making sure that your sites know what to do, you're doing your outreach, you're responding to the kids, you're entering all of the data. It's just so that you can actually do this stuff. That you participate in this implementation training. Well, guess what? You guys just now, you are. So this takes care of that. So you have that done. And again, because I was at NSP, I've been involved in this for such a long time, they were comfortable with me providing this training. So yeah, this is just the way that it worked out with all of this stuff. And then now this says that, it's expected to send the Safe Place staff to the National Safe Place Conference held every other year. And there's a little bit of a modification for the Indiana programs in that this conference can be somewhat expensive, and you guys don't get a whole lot of money from the state at all. I wish there was more. I try to, that's my goal, to get that increase, but you don't get a lot of money. So per your contract with IYSA, you are required to go to the annual staff development retreat that IYSA hosts, that is free for you guys. It's free to attend. The food is free, the room and board is free, and that's much more, I think, reasonable to expect you to attend something that's free and doesn't cost you anything than to attend a conference once every 2 years. It's probably going to cost you at least $1,000, if not more, to attend by the time you do registration, the hotel and your travel and all of that kind of stuff. So we being IYSA and the contract require you to go to the staff development retreat. We encourage you, and that's free. We encourage you to use the money that you get from the state to go to the conference, if when they have it, if it is at all possible. It's fun. It's if you've gone over a certain period of time, it's almost like a family reunion. You get to see people that you haven't seen for a while or whatever. We always do an Indiana thing. So Indiana's programs are always pretty well represented at the conference. And so we always like do a dinner or lunch or whatever. So you're encouraged, but you are not required to go to the conference. And they do have one this year. I don't think they've decided where it's going to be yet or when it's going to be. I think all that stuff kind of.
Seattle.
Is it the
Seattle.
isn't that's the RHY conference. That's not the National Safe Place.
Oh,
Yeah,
did they decide on that?
They have not. So the Seattle conference is the Runaway and Homeless Training and Technical. It's the RHY Grantee Conference. They have not decided on what they call the focus, the National Safe Place Focus.
Okay, I'm getting them all confused. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I don't think this one is not the one that's supposed. Oh, you know what? I think they're looking at Las Vegas. That's the last was like, but I don't know that they decided that, so don't quote me. All right. So as far as the sites go, and we'll go through the sites again. I'm going to go through this more specifically about what the sites are, but you have the sites, you have the procedures. We'll go through the procedures in more detail, and then the outreach. So those are in, again, the operations manual, which is on the NSP website. I can show you, and I will look at the website too, and the database, and I'll show you where you can find. Oh, you know what? I did this. I tried to do this with somebody. I think they took it down because they were working on updating this. So again, I'm just going to send this to everyone. I'm going to add Brooke, and I'm going to add Kelly. Oops. And
Anathea.
Morgan, and as a Rod. I don't think there she is. And Shayna, Jamie, there you are, Jamie. And take Dawn off so I don't get, I think that's everybody. Am I missing somebody? Speak up now for hold your peace. All right, so you so this. All right, so now you have this. And the next one. All right. We're going to go over procedures, and then after procedures, we'll take a quick break for everybody. I want you to know how this actually is going to work. So your responsibility as a safe place agency and as the coordinator is to make sure that when you go out and train sites and you train your staff at your agency, that everyone understands exactly what is supposed to happen and follows those procedures in this order. So we get lots of questions when you are out in recruiting sites about liability and, oh, you know, it's going to, I'm going to be more, is it going to increase my liability? Will I get sued if something happens? All that kind of stuff. And the answer is, first of all, you guys all have volunteer rider insurance, and they're covered by that because that's one of the requirements is that you have that volunteer rider insurance. So that they're covered by that. But if they are following the procedures, then they are protected. It's only when they don't follow the procedures that you actually increase their liability. So it's important that they understand what this is. And the good news is that it's actually pretty simple. And to go out and train a site really shouldn't take any more than about 30 minutes, unless they have lots of questions, because it is that easy.
Yeah, about 30 to 40 minutes, I found.
If they have lots of questions, then it will
Yeah, then it's 40. Yeah.
And they ask ridiculous questions about things that never happen. Like, so what if the parent shows up with a gun?
Yeah.
What would you do in any situation if someone showed up with a gun? You call 911.
Right.
You're saying, you know, you do get a lot of those types of, you know, kind of worst scenario kinds of questions. So understand that for you guys that are new coordinators, especially if you're going out and trying to recruit sites, sit down with someone else in your agency with another staff person and do this kind of practice this presentation with them, and then have them come up with all of the worst case scenario questions that you could possibly think of, and then you have answers for those, and then you'll be prepared. So sit down with your team and say, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to talk to the library. And, you know, what are all the questions that, you know, the worst case scenario questions that the library staff can come up with. And then you know, brainstorm the answers to those. Again, if they're following the procedures, they're covered with under your volunteer liability insurance. That's really going to, and they use common sense. For Pete's sake, you call 911 if someone shows up with a gun. Someone shows up and they're bleeding, you call 911.
And right.
That's so important to reiterate. I have so many people who don't ask questions, like that's what I get. So like reminding them about that factor just in case has been really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of common, you know, kind of common sense stuff. So one of the things that you guys will get that you can give to your sites is the safe place procedure sheet. And it actually is a sheet that's laminated that has all this spelled out with your phone number on the bottom of it and all that kind of stuff. That you leave that there, they have that, they should have that somewhere near the phone, somewhere that everybody can see it, so in a break room or something like that, so that they always kind of know what's going to happen. But really kind of, if a young person comes in, and you may have to, when you're, again, training the sites, tell them, you may have a kid come in and they may not immediately come up and ask for help. They're just trying to figure out whether or not they want to. It takes a lot of courage. It really takes a lot of courage to go up and ask a stranger for help.
It does. And in fact, can I add this? A lot of kids will wander stores, for example, or they look like they're loitering. I've had some grocery store staff tell me they thought maybe they were going to be shoplifters. And you know, so I tell our sites, you're welcome to go up and say, are you here because of the safe place sign, or do you need help with something, and not assume that they're there to cause trouble. And, you know, kids, it takes a lot of courage, and sometimes they're walking around trying to build up enough courage to say, I'm here because it's a safe place site. So by all means, I tell our sites, you know, very gently ask them if you're wondering why they're walking up and down the aisle and they're not shopping. So,
Right. Yeah, and that was exactly where I was going with that. Is that you know, you'll have, sometimes they have to ask, you know, can I help you? Is everything okay? And that will be what it takes for that young person to ask for the help. So when they do, they'll just, you know, the kid can say, okay, well, you know, I noticed your sign. You know, what kind of help do I get? And then they can say, okay, well, you know what? Let me call the shelter. They'll send someone out for you to talk to. So the sites is also, the employee is also kind of explaining what's going to happen with the kid too, so that they kind of know. So let me, you know, find you a place to, so you're going to speak to the kid, what's going on. This is like, okay, this is missing a little bit of stuff a little bit. So from the site point of view, they're going to, you know, talk to the kid. They're going to say, okay, so, you know, yeah, I can call if you want me to, I can call the Safe Place agency. They'll send somebody else out here to talk to you, tell you kind of what your options are. You know, is that okay? The kid will say yes. They'll find the child, a young person, a place to wait. It can usually, sometimes it's a break room so that they're kind of away from the public. Sometimes the kids don't want to, so they might, if it's a McDonald's, they might just go sit in the booth and you give them something to drink while you go make the phone call. They will then call the shelter, and the shelter or the on-call phone, depends on whatever it is, but they'll call that number. The staff person responds. You get as much information as you need. And then if you are going to send a staff person out, you can just tell them who's coming out. If you're using volunteers and you have to find a volunteer that's going to respond, you just tell the employee, okay, well, let me find a volunteer to come out. As soon as I do, I'm going to call you back. So during the day, typically it's going to be someone who is at your agency. It can be a staff person. And you can just say, okay, so Bridget's coming out and it's going to take her about 20 minutes to be there. Bridget drives a, whatever it is that Bridget drives, so that they can kind of see the car pulling up or whatever. And she'll have her ID on her when she comes in. So once they know who's coming in, you give them you tell them about how much time it's going to take for them to get there. And so they know where to, they know who to expect, then you can send that person out. So if you are using, typically what we try to do is we try to match genders. It's not always possible. And this is because the volunteer or the staff person may end up driving that young person back to the shelter or to a host home program or whatever. And so just to be safe, we try to send females out for female youth and males staff out for male youth. If you can't do that, then the recommendation is that 2 staff go out. So if it's a male and you're the coordinator, then someone else goes out with you. So that, and that's just kind of for the safety of yourself, for the safety of the young person, again, kind of protect yourself from some, accusations, liability, that kind of stuff. So this is, a lot of this stuff is about, calling the volunteer, and we really don't have very many that are using volunteers. Usually you guys are going to be the staff person. Now I want to note, so I'm going to go back. This says that if staff aren't available, you can call a cab. And if you have an agreement with a cab company. If you're going to do this, so this makes me nervous, I'm just going to say that. If you're calling a cab to get the, or Uber or whatever, if you need to get them and there's no other way to get them, I would say that's kind of a last resort. I personally would talk to the kid at this point. If I didn't have a staff person or volunteer to respond, I would call the site back. I would talk to the young person. I would say, okay, so our normal staff person who would respond isn't available. I want to make sure that you get here safe. Would you be okay if I called the law enforcement to transport you here? If they say no, then maybe we'll look at something else. But if they know it's only to get them to the shelter, a lot of times kids are okay. If you are going to use a cab company, then and there are agencies across the country who use cab companies to provide transportation for all of their safe place kids, but there are extra precautions that they put into place. So they work with a cab company who is willing to do background checks on all of their drivers. And they just go that extra mile to make sure that whoever that person is that's going to be in the car with the kid is, as we know that they're as much as we can, that they're a safe person to put into the car with them. Does that make sense? Most of us use volunteer staff, so it's not an issue, but I just want to kind of, now I say most of us use staff. However, we do have a couple of agencies that, at least one agency in town or in the state that if a staff can't go out, they use the fire department. So they have fire departments who are safe place sites, and it's typically not a fire engine, although I think kids might like to ride an engine, but it's like one of the smaller cars that will go out and do the transport. And if the fire, the fire department can't do that, then the law enforcement will do that. So you can be creative around this, but you just want to make sure that if you're using someone other than staff or trained volunteers, that you have an MOU in place that outlines what that procedure is for them, so that everyone knows what the rules are. And you have that's just kind of protection for everybody.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick. I know one thing I've seen as well is that part about checking your ID. As people get familiar with you, and if you just say that you're from an agency, I have a lot of sites who don't ask for my ID. Even though we train always to do that, but it's like, oh, well, you must know since you are already here or whatever. So I try to reiterate that. And I've had sites who, or if my staff didn't tell them who was coming, I have them call back and give them my name, just to like reinforce that idea, like you need to know who you're leaving a kid with or who's coming. Because that does happen, especially once they start to see your face a lot. But it becomes then, if they're training people and they're not asking for your ID, they're not training people to ask for an ID either. Or if it's not me that shows up and they just say, oh, I'm from YSB, everybody knows that's where the Safe Place program is from. So just reiterating that point sometimes can be really important, just because I have a lot of people who just tend to trust my face or something. I don't know, but they don't ask. So
yeah, I mean, I think if you're sitting in staff with volunteers out, then they just have it out there. They just, just have their ID out and say, so, and I'm, so that you have that, they know, and it should match. I think even if they're not asking, as staff or as a volunteer, we're making sure that they do that. That's just kind of protection on our part too, right?
Yep.
All right. So they know who's coming out. Once you get there, it is, like I said, it is important. This is that last part to under number 11, to identify yourself as part of the Safe Place program, that you actually have that volunteer, that information. We used to have Safe Place cards. I don't think we have those anymore. We just use our IDs. And this is here. So when the volunteer arrives, that's the shelter part. This is kind of hard to read this way. Okay, here we go. Okay. All right. So the volunteer shows up, volunteer staff shows up, they talk to the young person. You give the young person the option, you can stay there, and usually, again, if this is a staff person, you can do that. They can choose to leave, and that's the other thing too, is that kid can choose to leave at any time, and it's really important to share that information with the site employees. They can't make that kid stay. It is a voluntary program. They can try to encourage them to stay, but sometimes kids chicken out. They just like, okay, they've called, this is not what I want, this is too much, and they will leave, and they can. We cannot restrain a young person from leaving at that point. But if they stay, you show up, you talk about what the options are. If they want to go back to the shelter, at that point, the staff person or the volunteer is going to call the shelter back, and they're going to say, okay, I'm coming back with this young person, and it should take us about 10 or 15 minutes to get there. Before the age of cell phones, we would tell them what route we were taking, so that if our car broke down or it took longer, they knew where to find us. We really don't have to do that as much anymore now that we all have cell phones. But they need to know about when to expect you, and then you take that young person back to the shelter or your site. At that point, it really is going to be the shelter taking over. If you are a host home program, then you have a lot more responsibility, because you're going to be finding the host home for them, and it's a little bit longer procedure. We have a few agencies that have host home programs. So at this point, you're going to probably take them back to your agency, again, somewhere where there will be other people around. If it's after hours and you have to find a host home program, I would not take the kid back to the agency if it was just going to be you and that young person. At that point, I'd probably stay at the site, which they're always public places, and maybe, again, you can be in the break room, so there's some privacy to find the host home program or the host home family that's going to take this kid. But you want to make sure that you're safe and that young person is safe. And usually being around other people is the way to kind of do that. If it's a volunteer, they usually have some information to fill out, and they will leave that with the staff person at the shelter or your agency host home program. You always want to make sure that you follow up and say thank you if it's a volunteer. Just write a little thank you note. We don't do that as much anymore, and it really does mean a lot. So just kind of do that little thank you, and then your agency should complete the client information sheet that you're going to use to enter the data into the database. So
and the survey. But I want to just say something about the survey. If I'm transporting the youth, I'm asking them, I have the survey memorized, and I do, darn it. And I'll ask the kid questions so that if it gets forgotten, I've already asked them and I can complete it, at least to get that data entered.
Okay, so this is the client information sheet. It has all of this. So if you compare this to the NSP database, all of this information is the same, so that you're asking all of the questions that you need to actually enter into the database. Why did they go? What happened? And then you may not, so after they leave the Safe Place site, so this would be if they went to a McDonald's or a grocery store, what happened after they left that site? A lot of times they either go home or they go to the shelter. Very rarely would they go immediately. Sometimes, if they're saying that they're suicidal, we're going to make sure that at that point, we have to contact parents and get them to somewhere safe. But these are kind of what's going to happen after. And then if they go to the shelter, one of the things that you'll have to do as a coordinator is to keep track of that young person. And once they leave the host home or they leave the shelter, you'll have to go back and find out what disposition was after they left the shelter. And typically they go home with a parent or whatever, but you have all of these choices.
And how long they ended up staying.
Yeah, I know that's not on this form, is it?
Well, its length of stay is up there in the, if you scroll back up, it's
Yes.
there, length of stay. But sometimes when you're inputting the data for the month, they're still there, it's ongoing. And so you don't really have a number yet.
No. And you just would have to leave that blank and then go fill it back in once they leave.
Mhm.
All right. And so this is the front sheet, which you have your client information. And then this is the back one, which is the youth evaluation that Jane was talking about,
Yeah.
that she has and now has memorized.
Yes. So I do a verbal eval with them. Why not?
That's right. Well, and so this is important for a couple of different reasons. One, because we do collect some outcome information. We want to find out, the impact that the program had on the kid, but this also can be used as a quality assurance check for you and your program. If you are, and you may not be always the person that's going out and picking up the young person, but so this is, if you have volunteers can have this if you use volunteers in case the kid doesn't go back to the shelter, and they can fill this out with the young person, because it is important for us to get that, as much of that information as possible. Sometimes we may not get all of it. Get as much as you can to enter into the database. That's what's going to be helpful. And then at the shelter, once they have arrived at the shelter, the host home, then part of the intake process is actually completing this youth evaluation. So that you have this information, because this is about Safe Place.
Robin, did I miss it? Are you gonna send this form out, or was it with a packet?
Yeah, no, I'm sending stuff as we go over the forms.
Okay.
I'm kind of sending stuff out as we go over that. So, and again, it is on the, you know what? I just thought of something. I'm going to add, I think on the IYSA website, we have a Safe Place tab. And I'm not sure what's there, but I will add all of this stuff to our Safe Place tab on the IYSA website as well. And then if it gets lost, you can go back and find it there. All right. So again, you can use this if you have a kid who says that, maybe they strongly disagreed about the employees being welcoming and respectful. That means you probably should have a conversation. First with the kid, find out what he said, and then, so can you walk me with the site? Can you walk me through what happened with this situation, and just kind of see what's going on? Sometimes they didn't know what to do. Sometimes it's just the kid was feeling extremely vulnerable and took something the wrong way. But it can be, like I said, a quality assurance kind of piece. So again, if I send this to everybody.
Yeah, and before we break, and I might be finished at the break, I wanted to add a couple more things about site orientation and training. But let me know when you unless you want me to say something now.
Go ahead now. I'm doing this.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Just a couple of things come to mind. I always share at trainings. One is if a youth walks in asking for help and the employee recognizes the youth, they know each other, and this has happened before, that's very awkward for them both. We even had an employee say, "I know your mom. I can't believe you're here. You should be at home." I've asked people to please find somebody else to intervene if it's going to be uncomfortable like that. We don't want to spook the kid into thinking, like, never mind, maybe I shouldn't be here. And I always ask folks to be super nice to these kids. Robin, you mentioned the level of courage it takes for these kids to walk in there to begin with. I don't want anyone feeling like, feeling bad about asking for help. So I always tell them, kind of think of yourselves as an emergency room of sorts for kids who are in emotional distress. I just want them to feel like they're not doing something wrong by asking for help, and then that, just to say something like, I'm glad you know it was okay to ask for help, and I'll make a call, and I'm glad you're here, and that kind of thing. So to be super nice to these kids.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's totally fine to say, when you're training the sites, to talk about how much courage it takes for these kids to ask for help,
Mhm.
and to remind them, what did it feel like to be a kid and be alone and not know what to
Right.
do, have no one to turn to. So how they respond really can be the turning point for a young person's life.
Absolutely. And
So
one more thing I'll add. I don't want them asking a lot of questions. I think that's pretty standard, right? Because we don't want the kid to feel spooked into, they might start thinking, maybe they don't believe me, maybe I came to the wrong place. I mean, the questions will be there for the crisis shelter to ask.
yeah,
So just enough to know if they're injured, do they need an ambulance, do they want safe station called, or that kind of thing, and that's it.
yeah, because they're not counselors, they're not social workers, they should not pretend to
Right.
be. And
Right.
that's not their
Okay.
their job is to connect them with you guys. So there
Yep.
are occasions where you will get a call from a kid who is not at a safe place site. We get kids who call from their houses and they want help and they want to know what to do. And so a safe place call, anytime, so this is kind of, we don't always count these, and I want to make sure that you guys do. Anytime a young person is calling you directly, asking for help, that is a safe place call. And we want to gather as much information, all of the same information as much as we can on that client information sheet as possible. Now, we won't be able to get the youth evaluation on those kids, but if it is a young person who is calling voluntarily, that is a safe place call, and we want to make sure we get as much of that demographic information as we can. So that they may call from home, and we cannot go out to a young person's house and pick them up. Okay? I want to make sure you guys understand that. We cannot go out to a young person's home and pick them up because that is not safe. It is not safe for you. It may not be safe for the young person. You don't know what kind of situation that you are walking into. So in those cases, and we've had these calls before, we would ask the young person, so do you know if there's a safe place that's close to you? If they don't know and they have a cell phone, they can do the text for help and get the location of the nearest safe place site. If they don't have a cell phone, we can also use the text for help to find out the location of the nearest safe place site. Hopefully you guys know what that is because you know your programs. But if you don't, you still can use the text for help and find out the nearest location. If it's safe for them to get to that, we would encourage them to do that. If it's unsafe for them to get to, maybe they have to cross an interstate or it's really late at night and we don't want them to be out on the road by themselves, then we find the nearest public place for them to go, convenience store as long as it's safe, a grocery store, and again, if we are really, really concerned about the safety of a young person, then we would call 911. We would ask the young person, is it okay if I call 911 for you at this point, to make sure that you're safe and get you out of that situation. Sometimes they'll wait until the next day and they'll go to your program from the school. But we won't go home. And if we are concerned about the safety of that young person in their home, we will call 911 with or without their permission. If we are concerned about their safety, with or without their permission, we will call 911. And that is totally appropriate for you guys to do. Now, they may be mad at you, but at least you know they're safe. So their safety always, your safety, their safety, their safety, your safety. Those are kind of the parameters for making a decision about what you're going to do, where you're going to refer that kid, and how you're going to pick them up and make sure that they get the help that they need in the safest way possible. So it's okay to pick up from locations that are public locations that are not a safe place site. So, pick up from schools a lot, hospitals, libraries if they're not a safe place site, gas stations, grocery stores. It's as long as it's a public place, that's fine too. And sometimes that's a really good way to get a site to come on board, is if it's a location and they've got this kid who's in crisis, and you go and they say, oh, this worked out really well, then that might be a really good way to recruit sites as well. So you can pick up kids from non-safe place sites as long as it's not a personal residence, as long as it's a public place. And again, we want to make sure that the kids are safe. Questions around any of that stuff?
I kind of have a question and a thought as well. So one thing that I've noticed that happens because kids have cell phones, especially our kids who have used our program before, they will just go to a site that they know and call us themselves from the site. And so the site has no idea that they have a safe place kid there. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, responses in terms, I always call the site, like I leave and then because we have our 24-hour line to our shelter. So we have our shelter staff call the site themselves and say, hey, there's a kid in your lobby sitting there waiting for our safe place coordinator. Yeah. But I also kind of wondering other thoughts on that, just because I've had that happen a lot.
So I think what you're doing is great. I don't know if Jane has anything to say, but because one, if the site doesn't know, then they think, oh, I have the sign and know, kids are coming. So it's always good to know, that they have provided this refuge for this young person and this connection. Yeah. So that they feel how important they are to this part of the process. But then also just to, okay, so yeah, there's going to be some adult coming in, sitting down and talking to this kid.
Right. Yeah.
Don't know the safe place, then they may call the cops. They don't know.
Yeah.
They may, what's going on here? So that's always it's really good for them to know that. Jane, you have something to add?
No, not really. I think that makes sense, though. I think, that hasn't happened to us yet, where I'm sure it will, though, where kids will start calling using their own phone and not approaching staff. But I do agree the staff need to know. And they need to know, one, that their site was utilized, and two, that that somebody's on their way to go talk to the kid. So, absolutely.
Well, I think that reinforced some of my training too. So when you're talking about looking for kids who might be wondering about safe place or asking for help, I also kind of evaluate that situation. So if I know that there's been a kid sitting there for 20 minutes while I waited and there was never a staff that walked up to them to ask, sometimes I follow up with them and see, do you want to sit down and do your training again? Because you had an unaccompanied minor in your place and no one approached them about what was going on. If they were just sitting there, and granted it was a library, so they may have just thought, oh, a kid's getting picked up. But I think too, just creating that awareness of knowing a little bit more about what's going on in your location.
Yeah. If it's a restaurant or whatever, they may be able to get the kid a drink or, something to eat, but have if nothing else, a more private place to wait. So all of those things are important. One of the things that so I talked about the kid being able to leave, but we also need to make sure that we understand that if a parent shows up to take that kid home, they have every legal right to do so. And the sites need to understand that as well. Again, if it is a situation in which you fear for the safety of that child because the parent's irate or whatever's going on, then we encourage the site to call 911. You're not going to intervene. You want to make sure that you're safe. You may try to talk them down while someone else is calling 911. But if the parent comes in and they take the kid and you are worried about the safety of that young person, then go out and get the make and the model, and if possible, the license plate of the car, so that when you call 911, you can pass that information on. These are all, again, kind of worst case scenarios that rarely occur, but it's always nice to know what you should do in those extreme situations. So again, we cannot keep the child from their legal guardian. They have every right to go home, because we now have text for help, and kids have their own cell phones. They have lots of other ways to access resources, even if that happens. But we want to make sure that they know, the sites know that they cannot intervene. They have no legal right to keep that parent from taking the child home. And if they are worried, then we do go ahead and they call 911 at that point. So again, if you have a kid and you've sent the volunteer or your staff person out, they're supposed to be coming back to the shelter. It's past time for them to be there. The shelter staff needs to know they need to be calling the coordinator, the staff person, whoever it is, the volunteer, making sure everything's okay. That something hasn't happened. Again, that I am not aware of a situation that has occurred, but just in case. Any questions about the procedures, guys? All right, I'm going to send this to everyone. So while I do that, let's take a quick 5-10 minute break. You guys can go refill your coffee. Make sure that
And I'm logging off.
Okay. Thank you, Jane, for being on.
Thank you,
I
Jane.
was happy to help. I wish I could sit longer. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
All
Jane.
right. You're
Bye.
welcome. Bye.
All
So
right.
do you want to meet back at 10:40, which is 7 minutes?
Yeah, that works.
All right.
I give everybody time. So I'm going to send this out and we'll just resume at 10:40. Yes. We're taking a break. Do you need anything? We're taking a quick break. Do you need anything? No, up the training thing. You gonna get some of that done? Yeah. Okay.
Now is a good time to get some of it, that's not all of it. But now there's not all of it out of it.
Here's the names of the. You don't want this in there? Here, some food over here.
Mom, what are the edges again? What are edges?
Edges are the lines.
Mom, is there 12 edges?
Huh?
Is there 12 edges
Yeah. Yeah.
on the
I think I have a rectangle. That might be 10, I don't remember.
Mom,
Yes.
today can we go on a walk? But can I ride a bike?
Depends on when I get done with this thing. Or what the weather's like.
Oh, yeah, because all day.
Yeah.
That's gonna be like a long time.
I know. But it's just it's one of those things.
How are you gonna get it all done by night?
Well, I hope I'm done by 4, we'll see.
And how are you training? What are you training up?
A safe place. You know what a safe place is?
Like a place that safe?
Place that you can go get help. Yes. It's safe and you can go get help for kids. All right, so I'm gonna get back on here.
So my internet's being really weird, so I have to sit on my living room floor directly beside my router to make sure my internet keeps working. So if you look at my couch, don't mind my floor, my dogs are in here, but they're just chilling. One's on the couch, he takes up my entire couch, and then the other one's just hanging out on the floor. They may or may not try to attack me at some point. I'm just forewarning everyone.
Well, I sit here in the front room, so, and the cats like to sit on this chair. So when I'm doing training, occasionally, they usually don't do it, but once in a while, I'll get a cat that just jumps on the back of this chair. Yeah, or kids walking by or whatever.
My Great Dane used to try to sleep on the back of my couch when he was a puppy. And then he continued doing it as he got bigger. And I'm like, you're not, no, you can't do that anymore. You're too big.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's see. I'm like looking through. All right. Well, we'll still got quite a few people gone.
How's your grandbaby?
So she turned 9 months old yesterday. And she's crawling and pulling herself up on her own now. It was, let me see if I can find it.
Oh my gosh.
New pictures. You see that? So this is her at 9 months.
Oh
Oh, so cute.
She's
Look at
so
that.
cute.
no. So precious.
Yeah,
Oh
she's,
my gosh.
Look at
look at
those
those
blue eyes.
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Going so fast.
I know, I can't, I just, it's hard for me to believe, 9 months or whatever. They were supposed to come for Kale's graduation at the end of the month. Of course, their airline, their flight's been canceled, and so I
Yeah.
don't even know. I mean, she turns one the 1st of August, well, the 4th of August, and I don't even know. I mean, I don't even think we'll be able to travel then.
Where are
I
they at?
understand.
France,
I
Oh,
totally understand.
yeah. So
I
I'm
certainly do.
super disappointed that they're not going to come, and I don't know that I'm going to get to see them this year.
I totally understand. I don't
Yeah.
know if you can see that I have a brand new grandbaby.
Oh,
Can you see
let's
him?
see. Kind of. It's kind
Oh,
of.
I'm
There we go.
sorry.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh.
Very new.
Very new. And I haven't got to hold him.
Oh.
I didn't get to go to the hospital.
That's
Yeah.
great.
So
Yeah, some
yeah.
of them aren't even
Oh,
letting
yeah.
dads in.
Well, fortunately, her husband got to go in with her. She had to have a C-section, so he got to be there with her. But I haven't held him yet.
Oh my God, that just would be
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
been hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's a month old now.
He
He's
what?
a month old. He's
Oh
a
my
month
God,
old.
you haven't got to see him?
Not yet. Not
Oh,
yet.
oh no.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's really hard.
It's very hard. So
Chris, Sheena.
I'm hoping the next couple weeks. I got face mask and stuff. So
Yeah. Well, so the whole, like the state's opening at different times, but Monroe County, our county commissioners decided that we were going to continue to stay at home until the 18th of May.
is that
That's
right?
after like Indianapolis even. So let's see. Bridget's on. Everyone's back. Did we lose Brooke? Nope, Brooke's there. Okay. All right. Let's see. Just checking. Looks like, well, we still got some people, but it looks like most people are back. All right. So we're going to go ahead and continue. Brooke's not back yet, but she'll come back. Oh, there she is. All right. Thea's not back, but most people are coming back. All right, so we'll go ahead and continue. And we were talking about procedures, so it makes sense that we, the very next thing that we talk about are our safe place locations. Like I said, I wanted to kind of cover this a little bit more in detail. So for some of you guys that are bigger, I'll just like throw out what the districting concept is. When I was the coordinator here in Bloomington, like I said, we had Monroe County and Greene County, and Greene County is pretty rural and very much spread out. It takes about an hour to get from one side of Greene County to another. And to get from the furthest reaches of Greene County to Bloomington is a good hour and a half. So we did district, and I had at that time, so I was the clinical coordinator. We had an assistant director, our executive director, and then our shelter manager. And we all just, just by the stroke of luck or whatever, lived in different parts of Monroe County. And so we divided up Monroe County between us four. And so if, and I had Greene County as well. I had my area and then I had Greene County. And we were responsible for the outreach in that area. We were responsible for the site checks in that area. So it wasn't, even though I was the coordinator, I wasn't doing everything. We still did, we had, great outreach numbers. All of our site checks were done, every year like they were supposed to be done, but I didn't do everything. And I had, 3 other people who were doing presentations to kids, who were responsible for making sure that the Safe Place sites got done in their district. And if you have a large region, then this is really, really helpful. If you have a large region or spread out region, and you have the staff to be able to do that, it is helpful to be able to do that. So just know that, again, we can be creative in how this gets done. You as the coordinator, you don't have to do absolutely every single thing yourself. You can recruit other staff members in making sure that all of the staff, even, if you have really good, trusted, dependable volunteers, you can even recruit them to get some of this stuff done. But I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Some of you, as you grow, may want to, you're fine now, but as you grow, you may want to consider doing some districting. So just know that that's kind of an idea out there. This is in the Safe Place Operations Manual, Chapter 4, which is our Safe Place sites, site locations. So let's talk about how we select Safe Place sites. And I closed out the implementation standards. Those were actually pretty good when we talked about sites. So if at all possible, we want to have sites that are open 24 hours a day. You don't have to have, all of your sites do not need to be open 24 hours a day, but we do want a few, if at all possible, that are open 24 hours a day so that kids always have access to those. And fire stations are one of those nice, easy, Safe Place site locations that are, one, if you get the whole department, they're geographically dispersed. They have to be to respond to fires. They are trained. Very good. You gonna take a break? Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry. Homework. Homeschooling. Gotta love it. So fire stations are great as sites. The very first Safe Place site was a fire station in Louisville, Kentucky. We have a large number of fire departments that are Safe Place sites across the country, across the state. So there's a procedure that's already established. There's the specific training for fire stations as well. Lots of chiefs who will talk to your fire chief about what that looks like if you want your fire departments on and they're not on yet. So that's just kind of a really good, and they're open 24 hours. So that's, they make a really good site. So again, if they can, fine. If not, then they don't have to be, and we can use the if closed call decal on the door that gives the number to call if kids show up after hours. Typically, we want youth-friendly sites. So people who, first of all, will agree to hang the sign and to train their staff and to keep their staff trained and respond appropriately. So those are like, and if they don't want to train their staff and, or they don't want to keep up training their staff, then they don't get to be a Safe Place site. There is a lot of value in being a Safe Place location. And we need to help our sites understand that, that they get this, it's not just out of the goodness of their heart, they actually get some goodwill from hanging that site. People, there's like, I don't know, this assumption, if there's a Safe Place sign hanging on the door, then that's a safe place to be. And so they actually, we have a convenience store called Quick Trip, and that tends to be in the kind of, so like from South Carolina up through Missouri, Oklahoma, and then down into Arizona. And they have actually done a business study that shows that they have better business. There's an increase in business when their locations are Safe Place sites, especially with women who are on their own. They'll go to a Quick Trip before they'll go to another gas station because of that Safe Place sign. So they actually will benefit from that. And so we need to make sure when we're recruiting sites that we help them understand their payoff of being a safe place site as well. And, and their responsibilities, and we'll go over some of that. So places that kids will want to go, that kids feel comfortable. A lot of times when I was the coordinator, and I would go out and I do my presentations, I'd ask the kids, okay, so where have you seen the safe place site? What's the safe place site? What's a safe place site? And they would always throw out stuff, and they would always say the library. And the library was not actually a safe place at the time. And so I used that to try to get the library to come on as a safe place. I'm like, look, the kids are going to come here anyway. They think that this is a safe place. So, why not have the procedure in place? They already are going to be here. Eventually they came on, not under me. They had a lot of questions about liability, and they had just someone there that really was dragging their feet, but they did eventually come on. But that is kind of, if you're doing a safe place presentation and you ask the kids, okay, so what's a safe place? And they're saying something continually that's not a site, that's a good way to kind of go to that, identify what would be good, and then use that to get businesses to come on. So they, you know what, I'm going to go back and find the implementation standards. It might be here. But the implementation standards had it all like really nicely laid out.
Hey, a quick question while you're looking for that. For the safe place signs and stuff, when they become a new safe place, how do you get the signs and give them signs and stuff?
Okay, that will be through the signs. The big signs, metal signs, are ordered through NSP, and I'll walk you guys through that. The decals we can get through, so all of like the material stuff, I'll walk you guys through that stuff as well. But typically the signs come from NSP.
All right, thanks.
Let me find this. Come on. Hey, look, there's a budget. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. All right. So the implementation standards say that the safe place sites should be a mix between profit and for-profit and not-for-profit. They recommend this at a 3-to-1 ratio. Of course, it's not in here anymore. I will say that that can be difficult to do because they'll say, okay, so we want you to have for-profit, and it should be a 3 for-profit to 1 nonprofit because they want their for-profits to be able to give you money and support the programs in a way that nonprofits are not usually able to do. But then we also say, go to libraries, go to schools, go to fire stations. Those are not for-profit sites. So it is going to be okay to have to not kind of meet that criteria for the 3-to-1 for-profit versus nonprofit, because a lot of the places that kids are going to go are going to be nonprofits. When they say the libraries, they say the schools, they say the fire stations, those are just nonprofit organizations, and that's fine. So you want it to be kid friendly. They have to, and I'll go over the site agreement form, but they have to agree to all of those site agreement forms. When you are bringing on a new site, you do that first initial training face-to-face. It is, if you can do a full staff presentation or employee meeting, that's great. At the minimum, you want to train all of the managers. So at a minimum, you want to train all of your shift managers so that no matter who is on, there's someone who knows what to do. You have to, and we'll talk about the site checks once a year, and then we'll talk about the sex offender registry, because if they have someone who is a registered sex offender working at that site, they cannot be a safe place location. So I'm going to minimize this and go back to this. So we're going to look for kid-friendly sites. you want to make sure that your sites are geographically dispersed where kids are. So if you have your larger city and you have like an industrial park region and it's all kind of factories and stuff and there are no residential areas around there, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to have a site over there. It's going to be in residential areas and where the kids are congregating around schools and those types of things. So kind of keep that in mind. The idea is we want kids to be able to get to a site if they need it. That's really kind of the idea. And so a lot of coordinators, most of the coordinators have either visual maps where they can put push pins or stickers on their sites, and you can actually look at the map of your region and see what's covered and make sure that there's like representation. And you can now do that on Google Maps. I used to have a physical map, but now we can do it on Google Maps and get that type of representation as well. All right, so what cannot be a safe place site? You cannot have a private residence as a safe place site. So if it is not a business, it cannot be a safe place site. You can't have bars as safe place sites, all right? A place that only serves alcohol. Now, you can have a restaurant that also serves alcohol as a safe place site. I'm not saying that that's recommended, but if it is, let's say, an O'Charlie's or Applebee's, I mean, even pizza places sometimes serve beer and stuff like that. As long as it's not exclusively a bar, you know, as long as it's not a place to say you have to be 21 to enter, it can be a safe place site. We have funeral homes that are safe place sites. I don't know that I'd be comfortable going into a funeral home, but we do have funeral homes across the country that are safe place sites. We have tattoo parlors that are safe place sites. We have churches that are safe place sites. We've had apartment buildings where the office was actually a safe place site. I'm not thrilled with apartment buildings, apartment complexes being safe place sites because the kid may not know where to go. So I would say use that as, you know, with caution. I think there's too much a risk there, but we have had those as well. So, you know, you can, and if you have questions, just call, you know, and say, hey, or email, you know, what do you think about this? So, you know, it does have to be somewhere where you have at least, the recommendation is that there are at least 2 employees working at all times. That particular recommendation will often exclude convenience stores, especially during the 3rd shift, because typically there's only 1 person working at convenience stores on the 3rd shift. So you kind of have to, you know, use your discretion, but typically you wouldn't want to do that unless it was, so again, lots of rural counties. Greene County is very rural. I did have 2 or 3 convenience stores in Greene County, and they did just have 1 person on, but they were like the only safe place site in that little teeny tiny town. And so, you know, in some cases you can you can't do that if you have that kind of really good. And we had a really good relationship. They were very involved and you know, contributed and all that kind of stuff. So you can use your discretion in those cases. If you know, have any, if you want to talk about it, feel free to give me, again, email me, give me a call.
And I would say that's a good thing to talk about in your presentations too. So I know with my presentations, one of the things that, like, especially with little kids, when you ask them about where are safe places to go, they'll say somebody's house. And so having conversations about like why I don't choose that, even with the older kids, I always say, this is why I can't do this. And this is why I've found that to be a really important part of conversations with any kids that we have. No cars, no houses. And then you have kids throw out things that, you know, are totally inappropriate. But then I go through that conversation of why does that not make sense? So then
Yeah.
at least maybe you can think like, okay, it won't be those places. But, you know, when a kid wants to talk about why the strip club is a safe place site, we still have a conversation.
That's a great point, Bridget, because kids often will say my home. When you say what's
Yeah.
a safe place, they'll say my house. And then you can
Yeah.
have that conversation about no, you know, well, we can't have private residence because, and talk about all the reasons why, you know, it has to be a public place. We'll make sure people are safe. And that's good because on occasion, especially if you live in a college town, signs will disappear and show up in windows where they're not supposed to be, at a home or in a college dorm or whatever. And
Yeah,
then
it
people will
happens.
call and say, hey, I saw this sign. Or I mean, sometimes, you know, the kids will say, and I've actually had this happen where I was doing a presentation, the kid said, but I saw a sign such and such, and I went out and sure enough, someone
Yep.
had a sign from somewhere, and, you know, and I didn't go, I went back with a male person, a male staff person to actually get the sign to make sure that they got it down, but it's like, whatever.
Yeah. Well, and I have that too with people, like when I'm doing events, especially out at fairs, you'll see like adults who are like, well, my house is a safe place and I want kids to know they can come there and ask for help. And I constantly have to reiterate why I can't do that. And it's a liability for you to, you know, rip our logo off of a website and put it up at your house, or tell kids, oh, I'm a safe place, you can always come here. So it's a double-edged sword. And so I always wanted kids to know, like, if anybody tells you, even if they're a good person, they're not a safe place site.
Right.
And people to understand, I can't have you put a safe place site sign up. Even if I'm not giving it to you, you can't print one out and put it on your house. You can't tell kids that they can always come there. Like, they know you personally fine, but like, don't use my program like that. They're trying to be very nice, and I understand that, but I've had that conversation a lot, because people are like, how do I become a safe place site? Like, I can give you information to give to kids. You can help us that way, but you can't be a site, sorry.
Yeah. Great points. Thank you, Bridget. So you'll see here that there's a section on fire department involvement. There's a whole different procedure for fire departments. All of that stuff we have available, NSP has available on what that looks like, the specific training for fire departments. And we can make connections if you have a chief or whatever. I know that Huntington had a really hard time for a long time getting their fire stations involved, and then finally they have them on board, and Crystal kind of typed that in there in the chat feature as well. So, you know, we have specific instructions for fire departments as well as specific instructions for transit. If you're big enough to have a public transit, they also can be safe place. So it is considered a mobile site, and we have specific procedures in place for transit systems. Typically, they will just a kid will get on, they will say something about needing help. The bus driver will call the dispatch, and whoever is kind of the supervisor on call will meet the bus at sometimes the buses will take them to the shelter if they're on the route. Most of the time, the dispatch person will show up at the next stop and then transport that kid to either the transit office or the shelter, and they're in communication with the agency all of the time too. Sometimes the agency staff person, you know, so the coordinator or whatever will also go out. They can also go out and meet the bus at the next stop. But there's like all these procedures for what that looks like specific to transit, and we have a lot of transits in Indiana. So Indianapolis, Bloomington, I believe South Bend. I know there's more than that, and I can't think of what they all, but we do have a number of transits that in Indiana that are mobile safe place sites. Other mobile sites can be things like a lot of the fire departments will have their EMT vehicles as mobile safe place sites. We have
sites down here.
Say it again.
We have mobile sites down here.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
So is it your buses? Your rural buses?
Southern Indiana Transit System. Blue River Services has it,
Okay.
and our ambulances are.
Okay. Yeah. Clark County has it. But theirs is unique in that their transit is part of Louisville, so it actually crosses the river, and so they have some transit. But you can also have law enforcement. We have a number of sheriff's departments and police departments that have the sticker on their card. This is really a win-win situation for law enforcement because it helps kids understand that they are true public servants and not just punitive. And so that's helpful, and it helps kind of dispel the police are out to get you. They're really there to help you kind of thing. And so law enforcement really likes, to be able to be involved as mobile sites as well.
Robin, Crystal put, I lost my ability to use audio. We just got a new safe place site at my volunteer fire department due to the fact that we are next to a pond and a park. We've had people ask if we are a site, and I was able to talk to the chief of the department and the township trustee into it. I put everyone through QPR as well. So
Oh,
just
cool.
so you know that.
Nice. Yeah, fire departments are really nice partnerships. And so if you can get those, that's great. So we do have, you have that PowerPoint for the community. You can modify that for site site recruitment as well, but you would have to kind of add in some of the responsibilities for sites. So again, looking for sites that are easily accessible and highly visible, they really do need to put the big sign up. A lot of sites only want to put the little, like 6-inch decal on the sticker on their window. That is not enough. You cannot see that from the road. And so you really need to increase, if they're not willing to put that big sticker, so there's a big 14-inch sticker that can go on a window, and then the 2-foot metal sign, they need to be putting one of those in the very front window so that kids can see that from the street. And if they're not willing to do that, then I don't think they're really committed to being a safe place. And so kind of keep that in mind. Make sure that they're willing to do that. You can put it on a stake. If you can't put it on the building, you can put it on a post and put it out in front of the store. You can use the decal, the 14-inch decal, and put it in the window. There are different ways that they can be creative with identifying that, but they really do need to be putting that big sign up somewhere. They have to be willing, like I said, to train their staff. And here's where it says, have 2 trained employees on duty at all time. National Safe Place has made it easier to train site employees. And when we go to the NSP website, I will show you where you can direct your sites so that they can use the online training video for their site employees. And then you want, again, kind of reputable. One of the things that can happen is that you will have, let's say you recruit a business and they hang the sign, and then someone across the street wants to be a safe place site as well. Now you got to remember that you are responsible for checking all of these sites at least once a year to make sure that everything. So maybe they're not going to be a site, but they can contribute in another way. And so, you don't want sites stacked up on top of each other because you are responsible. You can, as long as you're willing to go out and check them once a year, but you really want the disbursement, and you can encourage people to participate in other ways. And so let's see, they're going to train their staff. We have that. What's 2? They're displaying the sign. I already said that. They do have to agree to keep everything confidential, have a safe place for them to wait. And then what we are going to do, and they're going to relay information. They're going to make sure that they're following the procedure sheet up and follow all of those, train their staff respectful, display the sign, educate any new employees coming in. Now, one of the things that we're not very good about, and I wish that we were, and I would encourage you, especially if you're recruiting new sites, is to help them contribute to your program, if nothing else, by agreeing to cover the cost of all of the material. Now, I don't know if it's still only $15 for the metal signs. Do you guys, is that right?
I feel like it's a little more, maybe like 17.20. I could be wrong. Vanessa had ordered, my previous coordinator had ordered a lot of signs, so.
It might,
But
I think it
it's
might
a little
have
more
been up a
expensive.
little bit. Anyone ordered signs recently? No? Okay, so
So did you say that we order them and pay for them for that place, or they order it themselves and pay for it?
you have to order them because you have to have a login to actually do that. So you order them, but they can help with the cost. So at minimum, $25, well, maybe now 30, should cover the cost of the sign and the decals that they need. If they are not a 24-hour site, then they do have to have the if closed call decals on the door. So it's just a little decal that says, if you need help and we're closed, and then it gives your agency number and it gives the text for help information. That's only if they are not open 24 hours a day. You do have to have the procedure sheet, which I think is about $6. I'm kind of ballparking this stuff. So I think $30 probably would, at the bare minimum, cover the cost of the material that you're giving them and a little bit of your time. If you can get more, get more.
So what if they don't want to pay they just want to be a member, like a safe place?
That's going to be up to you. If it's a really good spot and you really want them and you're willing to cover the cost, then you can. But if they're not willing to give you $50 safe place, then I don't think they're really committed. So
I know for me, I always have a conversation. Like I try to set up a meeting with someone first. I don't ever walk in and assume they're going to be a site just because they're interested. And then you can, when you have that meeting and you can just kind of say, you can just give the cost. Like this is what it costs every year to be a site. And I would definitely factor in $50 because you're going to replace their stuff that they lose or you drop off or gets damaged. And think about too, like if you have transit systems, you have to replace all the little bus sticker signs. I also have a sheet where I have them fill out what materials they want beyond what's required. So if they want extra procedure sheets to have in multiple places, because I find that with schools, I find that with some of our other bigger buildings, they want them in a few different places. So if they want more of that, it costs more. And so when you lay it out in a meeting and say, this is what it takes to be a safe place site, here are your responsibilities, here are my responsibilities to you, then they make a really intentional decision as to whether they're going to be a site or not. And it is just what it is. You don't just get to decide, oh, I'm going to be a safe place site and blah, blah, blah. No, there's actual requirements to do that. And if they can't commit to that, then they don't need to be a site.
Yeah, I tend to agree. We used to be, kind of in that whole kind of, nonprofit beggar situation where we were just so thankful that someone would be willing to do this. They're getting something out of this. We need to get away from that and really kind of understand that they have a benefit to that as well. So this is the actual, the modified Indiana Safe Place Site Agreement form. It's going to be in the manual. We modified it a little bit. And so it actually talks about what we're responsible for doing. So we will do the orientation and training. We will, make sure that they have the procedure sheets, which includes the step-by-step. We will send out volunteers or staff, within a reasonable time and make sure that they have the materials available. you guys can, this is a Word document, so you can modify it as you want to, as you need to, but these are their responsibilities. They are going to make sure that someone is responsible within their store for the program, and that includes training everyone. They're going to provide that safe place. They're going to be supportive and and here it says, keep things confidential. They're going to display the sign in a highly visible area on the outside of the building. And so, if they're a safe place and they don't have that sign, so I take material sometimes to the Safe Place sites here in Bloomington, just because that's where I live. And there is a Pizza Express, so it's a small kind of pizza company. And I took them the 14-inch sign, and next time I walked into the building, it's not on the front door, it's in the back of the building. You can't even see it. So that just drives me crazy.
Yeah, the West Side, they're fun.
Like, oh my God. The one closest to you?
Yep.
Oh my
I know who
God.
they are. I know exactly who they are. And another thing to think, I just thought about in materials is also to factor in, and not to overwhelm anybody, but kind of have an idea. You may have to provide like screws, or if you have metal signs that don't go on buildings and you're buying posts for them to put in those anchor posts or like whatever, like think about how those might go up and what you also, like those materials you may also have to buy. So give yourself some space.
And see, I would say that's their responsibility. I don't think that they're agreeing to be a safe place sign. It's their responsibility to hang the sign and to figure that stuff out.
That's what I usually do with most of them. You have to tell me how you're going to do it. But if you need me to go get it done, I'll get you the stuff. But you're going to pay for it, and you have to get it done. Or if I've had it too, like having drills and stuff, just so if a sign is coming off, then making sure I have supplies for that too. I guess too, I try to take control too much of some things, but if it needs to get done, then I'll just do it. Because some sites, they drag their feet, or they don't know who's really going to be responsible for putting up the sign, or they don't know how to put up the sign. And so it takes forever for them to figure it out. And if I can help them say, here's the materials, here's what you need to do, sometimes it just gets it done faster.
Yeah, because it says here, right, to install the sign on the building or
Mhm.
provide funds to offset.
Yeah.
So you have some flexibility, but if they're not going to do it, then they should be paying for it.
Yeah.
You also have to help them understand, that they're training all of the employees. And even if that means if someone comes in and asks for help, you go get the manager, that's still training. But all employees really should understand what it means to be a safe place site, and why they're there and why they're doing that. And that if they're, for any reason, they are no longer, this doesn't say, and here it is, okay. To use a screening process during hiring to avoid employing a registered sex offender. Or if they find out, they have to notify you as the agency immediately. And as long as that person is there, they cannot be a safe place site. And we have had sites that will let the person go. Typically, they can only do that legally they can only do that if there's some kind of policy in place that says that they can't hire registered sex offenders. When I was a coordinator, we had a grocery store, and they had a registered sex offender who was actually, I don't even think he was bagging. I think he was just like a person who was stocking the shelves or whatever. But he was a registered sex offender, so they couldn't be a site. And when I contacted them, they went back and looked at his application, and they had on the application, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And he was a felony sex offender. He had said no. And because he falsified his application, they were able to fire him. And so they used that to fight. So again, legally, they have to have a reason. And then I've also had sites that have registered sex offenders, but they were a really good worker, and they just chose not to be a safe place site as long as that employee was working there. They just have to understand that, and they have to, they're agreeing that, okay, I'm a safe place, so I'm going to do what I can to make sure that my employees are really safe so that when kids come in, they're okay. And then if for any reason they move, they close, they are not willing to train their employees anymore, they have a registered sex offender, that they'll remove that sign in that case and notify you. Gosh, we have so many sites close, and sometimes you just never know until you drive by, and then all of a sudden the doors are locked. So they're not really good at doing this, but at least they understand that this is what they're supposed to be doing. And I encourage you guys to have them sign this every year, not just when they become a site, but every year you're sending this out, they are signing this. It is a reminder of what they are agreeing to do as a site. And so you can kind of just have that assurance of what's going to be in place. And then I always had files for all of my Safe Place sites. So the file had, it had this Safe Place agreement every year for them. It had, if there were trainings, then I had training, like dates for when the trainings occurred. There are other materials, that I sent out. If they had a kid come in, then I would kind of keep track of that as well. That's not, I tended to kind of be a bit anal about stuff. So I don't know that that's, but you do want to have at least a file where you have all of your Safe Place site agreement forms signed. That.
Is there on that agreement, I'm trying to read it, but I can't see very well. Also, like if they have changes to their business, because I know that's one thing that comes up for me. They may not close, but they may move. And so I've had to work with a lot of businesses and moving, but just reminding them, because I've had several that I go to do the Safe Place, the site check, and they're not there. And I know they're not closed. They're just not where I thought they were, or where I had them. So even like reminding them, like if your address changes, your hours change. I've had some with drastic hour changes where it was kind of like, we need to evaluate whether it's really good for you to be a Safe Place site anymore or not. Or after school programs who get absorbed by the school. So they just kind of go away, or they're inside the school now. So that's something I also think about too, just if that stuff happens, so they know they need to talk to me about it. And I don't just not have an idea of where they are. Because I think that too reminds them too that like, we need to change over your signage. Don't just leave your signs in your old building. Make sure like when you rip them off, if you need to get new signs. So a lot of times those stickers don't come off and are reusable. Things like that.
So there's not, but I'm adding it.
Thank you.
All right, so I added to notify the agency if your location or hours change, or there are other significant changes that would impact your participation in the Safe Place program. Covered?
Fantastic.
All right, I'm gonna save this. This is a Word document. Like I said, you guys can change this if you, you can add stuff. I wouldn't take anything away, but you can add, and this is not going to be what you find from NSP, and the operations manual are on those because I think we added specifically the screening process and then you just saw that we added this notification if things change. So let me just send this out to everyone. And I will leave it as a Word document. You can put your logo on here if you would like to do that. You can, and I would definitely put your contact information. I think there's a place for you to do that as well. And then Bridget sent out a whole bunch of stuff too, not here recently, about like your site packet, right?
So I have a whole series of documents about doing site checks. I have a series of documents for a lot of things, but for site checks, well, what do you do when you have to follow like Robin Donaldson in your position? There's those, so if anybody wants those documents, it goes through like a checklist of what you do for each site check. It then has all of the specific documents. I changed up what I used for each location. So if I do it or someone else, they can just answer questions to make sure everything is covered when you're doing a site check. I also have a packet of information that I drop off at the site so that they have their site agreement, a materials request form, which includes a request for presentations or trainings and who to contact if they want that. Just so they get all of this together. It's got a pre-stamped envelope and then that goes out to them. I also have a list of what goes in the packet that I give. So there's a checklist for that too. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to send that back out too.
Yep, that would be great. So if you respond to one of the emails that I just sent out with all that stuff, Bridget.
Sure, I'll do it now just so I don't forget.
Yeah, that'd
Pandemic.
be awesome. Good job on all that.
Yeah,
I did
if
a
you
little
ever
weird.
need materials, Bridget's the person to get a hold of.
I like checklists. This is also because what I did, and I'll just tell everybody because then you may have an idea. So I have a Safe Place Coordinator binder for my agency specifically. So it includes like these documents, but then it also has how to do this job. So I have a lot of things around site checks, around scheduling. NSP has that great calendar sheet where it tells you month by month what activities are usually happening for Safe Place during the year. So I created some things for that. So that's also as a new coordinator, things you can start to kind of track for yourself. So you can automate your systems and your processes so you're not trying to recreate the wheel every year. I also have a lot of email language. So if there's any email language you're wondering about, like whether it's site participation, requesting meetings, requesting, I always email out before I do site checks because I have people who respond to emails and never look at the packet I leave. I have people who respond to only the packet. That's why there's a pre-stamped envelope because they don't read my emails. I will get someone to respond some way, somehow. So yeah, if there's any questions or anything like that, always feel free to email me because there's probably something I've got that I've kept.
Yeah, and we only have, so Jane was on earlier, Bridget's been on. There, we'll have, I know at least one more coordinator joining us, maybe a couple more that will join us in the afternoon. But you know, we have programs that have been longstanding for years and years and years. If you are missing something, if you want something, I would say ask the whole group first, because someone somewhere has something that we can share, and there's no reason for you guys to recreate the wheel. So one of the other things that we do with sites is we do have this so this also can go with your when you send out that site agreement form to renew, send out what we call the site contribution form, and so this also gives them an opportunity to first of all know how many youth that you have served in the last year, and you can kind of talk about that so they know even if a young person didn't go to their site, the Safe Place program is still being used in your community, and they're still a really important part of this network that's helping kids. And then give them ways in which they can contribute, and that can be monetary, but it also can be in-kind donations. It can be, so you have like marketing, they can do some marketing stuff. We have agencies and corporations that they coordinate volunteer days for all of their employees. So the employees come out and they have painted and they've planted gardens and they have done construction. They've read to the kids. They've organized, like backpack stuff. There's lots of ways that they can kind of volunteer. We can even have, usually it's not a site, but we do have like one-time service projects where they can go do Safe Place site checks. I don't guess there's any reason why they couldn't do that as long as they weren't checking their own site. But there are lots of different ways that they can volunteer. And so this just gives them the idea that just hanging the sign is one of many, many things that they can do to support the youth in their community. And so that, like I said, this would go out with the site agreement letter, and you guys can, I'll send this to you. You're going to get lots and lots of stuff around that, but okay. Yeah, you guys, all right. There you go. All right. So again, training a site really is not going to take that long. When you have a new program, you're always going to do that initial training face-to-face. Like I said, 30 to 40 minutes, depending upon how long they, how many questions they have. So it's really not going to take that long. You will take their procedure sheet, make sure that they have that. You'll take all of the material, the sign, the if closed call, all of that kind of stuff. And then every year, one of the Safe Place implementation standards is that you are required to go out and to visit all of your sites at least once a year. This is called your Safe Place site check. And when you go out, and there's actually a Safe Place site check form, which will be at the end of this. Let me find it. There's the district. There we go. Okay. So these are the things that you're going to look for when you go and you do a Safe Place site check. First of all, you're going to make sure that that big sign is in place on the outside of the building, or at least somewhere where you can see it on the outside that's visible from the street. If they are not a 24-hour, then you're going to look for that if closed call decal. A lot of times these have to be replaced because when they're cleaning the doors and the windows on the doors and that kind of stuff, they can get torn up. So, you know, always take extra stuff with you when you're doing your site checks. When you go in, you're going to ask, hey, you know, so I noticed, you know, you're part of Safe Place. What happens if a kid comes in and you know, you can identify yourself or not? What happens if a kid comes in and asks for help? And they'll tell you what that procedure is. And that procedure can be simply, if like it's a grocery store or a restaurant, that I'm going to go get the manager, but there at least needs to be at least one person in that store who knows what to do, who can refer back to the procedure sheet with all of those step-by-step directions, and then ask if they need trained. If you go in and they go, oh yeah, I'm not really sure, let me go get somebody. Well, we think that it's this, and they don't know, then you offer training. Even if they know, you can ask them for training, and this is going to correspond to the site check, the information that you're going to put on the database. So you guys, this is in, and I'll send this out so that you have that site check form. So you're going out at least once a year. This is going to be one of the things that you guys do not have to do yourself. This is a really, really easy one-time volunteer project to offer to church groups, to service groups, to student intern groups, or, you know, student organizations. You can get young people to do this, although I will say that if you're using young people to do site checks, it's probably helpful to let your sites know that that's going to happen so they don't feel like you're trying to get them. Because a lot of times if you send kids out and they feel like you're trying to, like it's almost adversarial. So, you know, I think it is helpful to let them know if kids are going to be coming out to do that. And it's like, I mean, it's so easy. It's so easy to do the site check that, you know, if for a volunteer group, bring them in the morning, feed them donuts and coffee, and 30 minutes you go over the site check. You have all of these. So if you're using a group, then I would say go ahead and have, pull this back up. Oops. Go ahead and have this filled out, and you can send them out with where they're going, and they'll have to put who they contacted, give them a self-addressed stamped envelope for them to, you know, manila envelope for them to send this stuff back to you, and you've got your site checks done. You don't have to do it. Does that make sense? Other employees can go out and do this as well. It doesn't just have to be you. It can be other agency employees to do your site checks. It is, I always like to do my own just because I like to get the face-to-face stuff. And I always did mine in the summer when it was really pretty to be out driving around. It's the spring and summer when, you know, I'm not doing school presentations, but that's up to you guys. There are, and I'll show you the different Safe Place training videos, one specific for firefighters, one specific for just regular sites that are on the NSP database. When we go to the, not database, the website, I'll show you where that is when we cover that. And then, I don't know, Bridget, you got anything else to add?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm sending the site check stuff now, so be just a few minutes.
Anyone have questions about sites? Recruiting, site checks, any of that stuff? So let me say this, and we'll go to the database, but I will say that having an up-to-date site list on the database is very, very important. So if you know that an agency has closed or site has closed, you want to immediately make them inactive on your database. If you are adding, then you want to make sure that you add them to your database site list, the NSP site list on your agency page, because that is what is used for the text for help. So if you have an old site and you haven't made them inactive, a kid possibly could get sent to a place that's no longer a safe place, and we don't want that to happen. So it's important to keep that site list updated. So this is site list.
And I'll say that one thing that came out of NSP, I don't know if anybody heard, especially during the pandemic, they asked everyone to make sure your sites are inactive that aren't currently open or temporarily closed for that very reason. So even if they're not sites that are closed permanently or not they're still going to be sites, but because of what's going on, aren't open or aren't available, making sure that they're also inactive right now, and then they can be turned back to active later after things have cleared up. That was new to me and really helpful, just in case you hadn't picked that one up too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Let me see what else. Okay, so before we leave, let's talk about the site stuff. Let's talk about the sex offender registry. So this is this is actually the NSPN policy. This has been in place for a long time. This has been in place at least since 2006. And it just happened because a site had a sex offender, and I don't remember, media got a hold of it somehow, and so it became this big deal, and NSP had to create this policy around sex offenders. But it does really, really talk about the importance of making sure that we are checking. And so this is so NSP has this policy basically saying, you really should be aware of whether or not your sites are hiring sex offenders, and here's where you can go to look and check all of that kind of stuff. And if we find out that the site is employing a sex offender, then they either have to, the employee can't work there anymore, or they can't be a safe place. And that's kind of the extent of the NSP part of this policy. If you find out the site can't be a safe place site anymore, or the employee can't work there. We have additional requirements around sex offenders because I want us to be proactive. And so as a safe place agency, you are required per your contract, and then just because you are a safe place in Indiana, that participation, you are required to do quarterly sex offender registry checks. And you can do that a couple of different ways. A lot of people go to the Indiana Sheriff's Department online. They have a sex offender registry. And you can type in your, Bridget, what's the easiest way to do this? Oh, she may be busy.
Sorry, I put mine in the, I've saved the website. I can send the link, just one moment, I have it saved. And then it just has a list of all your counties. This is a time-consuming process, so just make sure you have enough time when you're gonna do it. You're also gonna look at your community different. Just aware, pick some really good positive music and change it up so you don't associate, but when you do it. But I can send the link and then I just star it. And so every time you go to it, and then make sure you print the sheet when you're doing it, so you have some sort of proof that you've done your check. Hopefully your printer does the timestamp. I found mine doesn't do that anymore. But so you can prove that you did it every quarter, like you're requested to do. So, but it's one at a time. It's a little slow. If you have the ability to work with your local sheriff's department, probation department, and you're able to create a relationship with them where they can notify you, I encourage it. Just and this is also a good way, honestly, you're going to find out what places to avoid with sites. I don't have fast food restaurants for a reason, because they show up on the list. So I know what places not to go to in my communities and what places to go, but also so many offenders don't list a workplace, that it's probably good to have a relationship if you can with your sheriff's department. So if you know, you can talk to them and ask them where people are working, or press upon them, hopefully, that they would help you out to make sure, like, if they notice a site and they know they have people working there, that they can help you as well. Because I think it's a little bit complicated when people are trying to find employment, and we know as felons how difficult that is. So the idea of falsifying an application is not a stretch sometimes. So it's not my funnest day, but you find ways around it.
Do you type in your zip code, or do you actually type in the address for each of your employees?
Depends on how you want to do it. So I go one by one actually with the offenders. So yes, I know what they look like and I know their names. But I have 125, 30 sites. I forget the number specifically, but I have that many sites. So I even out about whether I want to type in each individual address or I want to just look at where people are working. So it depends. Like if you only have 14 sites in your county, I have 3 counties, so that's why it gets complicated for me. But if you have 14 sites, it's easier to type in your address and see if anybody's working there than it is to do it the way that I do it. So just depends.
Okay. And so I would kind of, as Bridget said, so like South Bend, they have like over 200 sites. And so she does have a relationship with their sheriff's department. Sheriff's departments are required to run this report monthly to see where their sex offenders are living and where they are working. So they're already doing this. So it's easy if you have that relationship to give them a list of your sites. And then they just compare the sites against where the offenders are working. And if they get a hit, then they email you and say, hey, I had one show up at such and such place. Or they email you and say, ran the report, all good. And then that's what you can print off as well if you don't do this individually. But the idea is that at least once a quarter, you have some documentation that shows that you are checking to make sure that you don't have sex offenders working at your site. That make sense? Questions?
I just sent that link in the chat too. Okay. So if anybody wants to just save it on your computer and you have it.
All right, and I think I'll share this one as well to everyone. Oops. Nope. So yeah, I got a smart.
Yeah, what I do is I'll type, since we just have Harrison County right now, I'll just type in my site address, and then the list of offenders come up, and then I go through each offender and see if there's, the work history and all that business come up, and I guess that's the right way to do it, just to make sure, I'm checking their history. So
okay.
That's it.
All right, thank you, Yvonne. Yeah, there are different ways to do this. And let me once again say that you guys do not have to be the one who is doing this. If you want, if you have other staff people who, let's say you have a shelter and there's overnight staff and they need things to do overnight to fill the time to make sure that they stay awake, they can do this. You can have someone who sits at your front desk and maybe they are, don't have, they're trying to look for things to fill their time, they can do this. You can have volunteers do your sex offender registries. You're just responsible for making sure that they get done. You don't have to be the one who does it. If you want to know, then, like Bridget does, then that would be a reason to go ahead and do that. But I just want to say, you're just responsible for making sure that it gets done. All right, it looks like we've had a couple of more. Yes, we did. We have 2 of our coordinators at 2 current programs join us. Yay! Hey, Carly. Hey, Cameron. You guys want to unmute and introduce yourselves to the group?
I'm Carly Reed. I'm the Safe Place. Oh,
Go ahead,
can you guys
Carly.
hear me okay?
We can now when you're close.
Okay, my computer is not working for me. I'm Carly Reed. I'm from the Youth Service Bureau of Jay County, and I'm the Safe Place Coordinator and CARS Coordinator there.
Okay. I'm Cameron Shackelford, Safe Place Coordinator in Allen County. And we just left another Zoom meeting to get here. So.
Well, welcome, guys. I'm glad that you joined us. We've got Bridget on, Jane was on earlier, and then pretty much, I mean, Yvonne's been around, you guys probably know Crystal, and then we really do have a lot of new people on as well. So as I go through this, I have been encouraging you guys who are seasoned coordinators to chime in and share your information and your expertise as well, so that I'm not the one doing all the talking. I mean, I like to talk, but all right. So let's do this. Let's cover outreach, and then we will break for lunch. I think we probably can get this done so that we can break for lunch around 12:30, and then we'll come back on and go through some and finish this up. I think we're making pretty good time. We'll see. You guys joined at the perfect time, talk about outreach, because I'm sure the new folks are going to have lots of questions around this. Okay. So this is one of the implementation requirements. It's one of what we consider a core component to the Safe Place program. As I said, kids are not going to use this program if they don't know about it. And so this is probably where you are going to spend the majority of your time. If you are a part-time Safe Place coordinator, you're doing this in addition to other responsibilities, as many of you are. A lot of your Safe Place time really is going to be going out and talking to the kids and making sure that they understand what the program is, how it works, what's going to happen when they get there. I think the more information we can give kids, the better, so that they feel safe, they feel comfortable about doing this. So I was going to show you guys here. Here we go. All right. Once a year, usually around November, NSP is going to send you guys a program goal sheet, and they want you to establish goals. And one of the goals that gets established during this time is your outreach goals. So implementation standards from an NSP point of view is that we are talking to at least 25% of your total youth targeted population. For us, that targeted population is usually between 10 and up to 18. And so I'll tell you guys how I get these goals. Are y'all familiar with the Kids Count data book that comes from IYI publishes the Kids Count data book? They actually, if you go use the Kids Count data book, and you find this online, they actually break down the youth populations by county according to different age ranges. And so one's like 10 to something, then so basically I combine like the 10 to 8 up to 18 to get the total number of kids in a particular county. So for example, Blue River, and if you guys are not doing Crawford County right now, then your goal probably is a little high. But for Blue River, and they were doing Harrison and Crawford County, the total number of kids who are 10 to 17, according to the Kids Count data book, is 5,325. 25% of that is 1,331. So I like to stretch a little bit. So I encourage that, the goal to be about 1,500 kids for those two counties. Again, Yvonne, if you guys are not doing Crawford, then we need to talk about this, and this can be modified, understanding that this is under normal circumstances. We've already kind of talked about what, the allowances that we're going to make because of COVID. So that's kind of where this number comes from, so that you guys have an idea. And on the database, and I'll show you this as well. So this is what you turn into NSP. Every year, NSP I send this to National Safe Place so that they understand what our expectations, our IYSA's expectation is for your outreach goal. And we try to make sure that these match. You guys also get this. When I know that NSP has sent out the notification for your goals for the year, then I'll send this out just to make sure that you have this. This is really important, and this is why. First of all, it's part of NSP implementation standards, that 25%. And if you are applying for or receiving the Safe Place state funding, and when you do the request for proposal, part of that, your score for your grant application is based upon your goals. There's 100 points total in the RFP process, that grant application. 100 points are possible. 10 of those points are based upon your outreach. One, that you have the correct goal, and that's 5 points. 5 points, that's pretty significant out of 100. That you have the correct goal, and the other is that you're actually meeting that goal. So if you think about this in terms of, and I will tell you, the average score on our Safe Place proposals is right around 93, 94. It keeps going up because people get better in the process. And so 10 points can be significant. And the amount of money that you get is based upon where you fall in that range. So if you score significantly lower than other people, then you're not going to get as much money based upon that. So this stuff is really important. And I will send this out so that you guys have this. I'll just do it right now. Everybody should have it, but I'll just go ahead and send it now so that you have this and you know what that is. And then I'll show you where you look for this to make sure that you have the right numbers on the database. Now, that being said, I have so many agencies whose goals far exceed what I have on this sheet. So look at Monroe County. Bridget's a go-getter, right? So that their expectation is 4,100. Their goal is over 10,000, and she meets that goal. Huntington County is the same way. They far exceed what they're supposed to do. And so just because this is what your goal is, it doesn't mean that it can't be higher, because it can. So so you have that piece. So how do we do outreach? It used to be easy. It's gotten a lot more complicated since I was a coordinator around that. So one of the best ways to do outreach is to actually go to the school. So really what you want to look for is you want to look for places that kids naturally congregate, where you have kind of this captive audience, if you will, to reach a large number of kids. And school is the easiest place to go to do that. But schools are getting harder and harder to get into. And many of you guys, maybe only try to target the middle school and the high school, and it's even getting harder to get into the middle school. And so I would encourage you to think about maybe starting your outreach at the upper elementary ages, so like 5th and 6th grade, because elementary schools are easier to get into. Kids pay attention better at those upper grades than they do in middle and high school. And so, and it's just, like I said, it's easier to get into, it's easier to do the pre-post under those circumstances. That's one thing I didn't pull up, is the pre-post. But think about the age that you're seeing kids coming into the shelters. And then I would, we were only, when I took over the program in Bloomington, we were only doing middle and high school presentations. But I started to notice that the kids we were starting to get a lot of 12-year-olds in the shelter. And for me, that was the reason that I went to 5th and 6th grade, because they needed to know about this program before it reached the point that they actually needed to come into the shelter. And then I found out that it was so much easier to get into elementary schools. The kids were much more engaged and paid attention. And so I felt like once I got to the middle school, and I was in elementary schools, I would do sometimes classroom presentations. If it was a small elementary school, I might do all of the 5th grade and all of the 6th grade. So maybe 60 kids tops, whatever. And that's not really manageable for the pre-post. 30 is a classroom is manageable for pre-post. There are lots of different ways to do that. We'll talk about what that is. But I would do the face-to-face in elementary. And then by the time we got to middle school, they'd already seen me 2 times. So when I got to middle school, I would do a convocation. So all of the 7th grade came, or all of the 8th grade came, and I would do a presentation to 300 kids. Sometimes they paid attention, sometimes not so much, but I knew that they already had the information a couple of times, and they'd still see my face in middle school. And then when I got to the high school, then I would do the video where I would make that video available to the school. They would show the video electronically in homerooms. The teachers would pass out the Safe Place cards, and then I would just call and say, okay, did you show the video today? Yeah, we did. What was your attendance? Well, we had 1,278 kids in attendance today, and that was the number then I could count to presentations. Because by the time they got to high school, they'd already seen me 4 times. If they were in the school system, from 5th grade all the way up to high school, they didn't need to see me face to face. That video presentation was enough. And like I said, you do this often enough, long enough. I mean, I only was a coordinator for about 3 years. But I very quickly became the Safe Place lady out in the community. So they get familiar. They get 3 or 4 years, but they get comfortable with you. So that's kind of how I did it when I was doing presentations. It worked well. I will leave it up to you, you guys, to determine especially what age you want to start and the ease with which you can get into schools. It may not be a problem for you guys to get into middle and high schools, but it got hard. And I heard this when I was at NSP nationally, and we've talked about this with Indiana as well. So let me find okay. I want to find
I was going to say too, Robin, this also connects to that. You don't have to do everything yourself. If you have trouble getting in your schools, I know I do, see who's already going and build partnerships with them. So for me, there's one school district that they do the coverage of, excuse me, they already have people that go in to do the requirements that they have, and they don't want any other presentations coming in. And so I worked with an agency that's providing building healthy relationships curriculum already in their schools, because that's a requirement for the school, and tagged on to their stuff. And I trained their staff to give our presentation. Now I still have to work out pre-post figuring that out. But it was a way to get into the schools without me having to do it, and getting that information to kids as well. So you can explore that too, just what partnerships can you create with people who are already in the schools, if you're not having luck getting in them.
Yeah. And if you have programs, like your agency already has other programs that are in the school, then you can tag on to that. So again, you don't have to do it, but if you have agency staff that are already in the schools doing stuff, then you can train them on how to do this. So this is the outline. Then we'll talk about kind of how to go about doing that. But you'll do kind of an introduction. If you have, so the guideline for the pre-post is if you have 30 or less kids and more than 30 minutes to do a presentation. doing a pre-post when you have less than 30 minutes is not the best use of your time. And so if you have 30 kids, less than 30 kids, more than 30 minutes, that's kind of the guideline for when you might do a pre-post. You can also give the teacher the pre-post before you show up. They do it in the classroom before you show up to do the presentation. You do the presentation. You can do the post at the end of your presentation, or the teacher can do it afterwards, and then she just mails you that. There's lots of different ways that you can do this and get the pre-post information that you need. So feel free to be creative. But the kind of standard is that we want, is it 20% of, it says in the contract, 20% of presentation numbers or no more than 2,000 pre-post a year. So for a lot of you, you don't have really high outcome numbers or outreach numbers, so you're looking at maybe 400 or so presentation. For those of you in larger areas, then that 2,000 cap is going to be helpful, because otherwise you'd be doing a crazy amount of number of pre-post. So that's kind of the expectation around that.
And I have a question.
Sure.
Are you talking about 20% of your numbers of the percentage of kids of those that need to complete the pre-post, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you make a higher number of presentations that do not have a pre and post, but you have to have 20%, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you have, like, if your outreach goal is like 4,000 or whatever, then that's 800 pre-post. You're obviously going to talk to a lot more kids than you get the pre-post from. You also want to try to make sure that your pre-post are representative of your total youth population. So some come from elementary, some come from middle school, some come from high school, in different areas as much as possible. Right? So they're not all elementary, they're not all from one particular school, as much as possible. All right. So this is just a standard outline of what a presentation looks like. You'll do a basic introduction. You know, you always, there's a safe place sign that you can take with you that's really lightweight. You can get that from NSP. You know, ask, and these are just kind of guidelines while you're there. You know, say thanks for, you know, being here. Let me talk to you. Ask about where safe places are, where they've seen the sign. Again, that's when I said, you know, kids will say stuff that maybe aren't sites, but you can use that for recruitment for sites. You can also, as Bridget mentioned earlier, talk about what should not be a safe place, where they should not be seeing signs. So it can't be, you know, the homes or that kind of stuff, or the strip clubs. That's just somebody being a butt. Really, but whatever. So you can have those conversations, and then you can, and you guys, there's a video, and there are lots of different vignettes. This comes from NSP, and you guys should all have your student presentation videos. You can choose what vignette to show based upon the age of the kids, based upon the problems that you have with their community. So there's one with a younger kid that's getting bullied by older kids that I always used with the elementary kids, and then there's like a date one where she feels unsafe on a date situation. There's one like an abusive situation at home. There's even a cyberbullying one. Watch them. Make sure that it is appropriate for your age that you're presenting to. And one of the things that you also might want to do is to either show or get, you know, or make sure that the school or whoever it is understands what you're going to be doing and what the kids are going to be seeing, because some schools have problems with some of the vignettes, and you don't want to damage that relationship. So you want to make sure that they're okay with the material that you're going to be presenting as well. So that's just kind of a, you know, lesson learned the hard way kind of story around that stuff. So you'll talk about what it is, what the sign is, where they can find. So if you have all of the McDonald's, you can say all of the McDonald's in Bloomington, or all of the libraries in you know, Greene County, or whatever it is. that they can kind of understand what that is. Then you know why kids go there. So and this is give participation. Why do you think a young person would go to a safe place sign? The kids will throw out a whole bunch of different ideas, and you can talk about what those are. And if you have some of the stuff here, what that might be. Talk about why they use safe place instead of. Where is okay procedures. You also, when I was a coordinator and I would do presentations in Greene County, I could not, a specific Greene County school system, I could not say running away. They told me that when I came in and talked to their kids, I could not use the terms running away. And so again, that's that importance of making sure that the schools are on board.
What time did you use?
I said if you had if there was your home was unsafe and you needed another place to go. So
we have to say leaving home without permission.
There you go.
Which is the same thing.
It is. But you have to kind of that's what you have to go with it in order to get in front of the kids to do that. So a lot of times the kids, I'd ask the question and the kids throw that back, but you make sure you cover all of these things. If there is cyberbullying, if you're, in an situation with friends, all of these kinds of things, just throw all these ideas out there so they know why it is and what's going to happen. Why do we have the Safe Place program? So they can be safe, so that they can get the help that they need. And then there is the Safe Place video. And so you have the scenario and it will, the videos do go over what the procedure is, but I always think it's important to, once you show the video, repeat what those procedures are, especially if you have specific, I was looking at Crystal's comment where she couldn't say abuse or suicide, which, it's like people think that you're going to give these kids ideas and they're already thinking this stuff. But again, you just have to be respectful of that. But when you are talking about this, it is extremely important to talk them through the procedure and to make sure that they understand the limits of what you can and cannot do within your program. So I would always make sure that the kids understood that if they were telling me or one of my staff people that someone was hurting them, or that they were hurting someone, or they were thinking of hurting themselves, then I am required by law to notify Child Protective Services. If I know that someone is being hurt or someone is hurting them, then so you kind of talk about the limits of confidentiality so that kids aren't surprised. They know from up front that if they say something about being hurt, then you're going to call Child Protective Services, that you're going to do what you have to do to make sure that they are safe. I would always, always, always tell the kids, if your parent shows up to pick you up from the site or from the shelter and there are no abuse allegations, then I have to let you go with your parents. Now, I'll still make sure that your parents know that there's a resource for help, and we'll, I'll still be in contact, and we'll still make sure all of these services are available. But I had to let the kids, I just, wanted to make sure that they knew that even if they were just fighting with their parents and they wanted to get away from home, or, that the parents showed up to take them home, I had to let them go home. That I couldn't keep them from their parents unless there was a reason, which would require Child Protective Services to get involved. When you are upfront about the limitations of your services, about the limitations of confidentiality, then you build trust. There is automatically some transparency in what's going to happen. I would also tell the kids, even if you are making allegations, sometimes Child Protective Services don't have enough evidence to open a case. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 calls before we're able to get you the help that you really, really need. So that kids are not disappointed, so that they don't feel like they've been lied to, so that they can make an informed decision about whether or not to seek help. They know all of those limitations. They know what to expect. So if you have agency restrictions, you have to talk about being a mandatory reporter, always, always, always. You do talk about confidentiality, that you'll try to, but what those limits of confidentiality are, that you can't keep them from their parents. All of these types of things are really, really important for them to understand, so that they can make that informed decision and you can build trust. The worst thing to happen is to make promises that you can't keep. So if your parents are being, if your parents are being mean to you and you're not safe at home, come use Safe Place and I will make sure to keep you safe. Man, you can't say that, because even if there is even if there are allegations, even if there is abuse and it can't be substantiated, there's nothing you can do about it. That is beyond your control. And so you have to help the kids understand what's within your limits of control. And Bridget made the comment that it's important to talk about this with sites too. And it's hard, guys. I mean, I've been in that situation where we had a kid repeatedly come back making allegations of abuse and neglect, and it took five reports before CPS was finally able to substantiate. And we could do some over a period of about 9 months. And it was frustrating for me and it was frustrating for the young person, but they knew that Safe Place was always there. They knew that we were trying. We would give them, temporary support and get the family involved. So it is really important to talk about those limitations. You can share information about statistics statewide or locally. I don't know that makes, I think the benefit of sharing local statistics is that kids know that they won't be the only one using it, but I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on that. I'd spend the most of the time talking about why kids use the program, showing the video and talking about your procedures, and then talking about Text for Help. And so Text for Help, you guys all know Text for Help? Right, it's another Safe Place initiative where kids can text and they get information about the nearest Safe Place site. They get the shelter phone number. If there is not a Safe Place program within 50 miles, then they get the National Runaway Hotline. It's a switchboard, but now it's called something different. It's National Runaway Hotline. So they still get, and they always through Text for Help have the option to text live with a trained mental health professional at any time if they're using Text for Help. All right, so share that information. If they have their phones with them, some schools let kids keep their phones on them, some kids don't. You can actually have them test it out. It's a really good way to figure out whether or not something's working. If you have them test it, because they text safe and their location, if it's a test, have them text T safe, so TSAFE for those tests. And you guys do the same thing when you're testing it out, because that way NSP knows what is a real call and what is just a demonstration. So that T, if you're doing this as a demonstration, is really important to keep NSP numbers straight, just so that you know that. So it does have a list of frequently asked questions by youth. This was developed by NSP, so these are national questions. So make sure you have answers to this. If they say, what if I have a friend who's 18? What's going to happen then? Then you have an answer to that. If I have a brother, so I want to leave my house with my brother and sister, and your shelter limits are from 10 to 17, and the brother and sister is 6 and 7, or whatever, have an answer to that. What's going to happen? We still respond. We always respond to kids at Safe Place sites, even if they are above or below our age limits for our shelter. What will happen when we respond is what's different. So the resources and that kind of stuff. But you can always talk about that. Anytime you're talking to kids, make sure they have a card in their hand. That's how you guys keep track of numbers. That's the easiest way to keep track of numbers is your cards. How many did you leave with? How many did you come back with? That's the, and the difference is the number of kids that you talk to. So that's the best way to keep track of that. And then if you have time, do the post test. Any questions about the actual procedure? or the outline of the presentation. Someone, oh, look,
Robin,
that,
I had a quick question.
yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I gotta check every time. So I had been under the impression for a while now that even if they report abuse, if there's no physical signs, we'd have to let them go back with the parents, but it's just if they report it, so we have to call DCS, then they could stay with us even if parents. Because I was always thinking there had to be a physical sign for them to, but it's just if they report it, then they can stay. Okay.
Yeah.
We haven't had that issue yet, but that's just what I've thought.
If kids are making allegations, regardless of whether or not there are physical signs, you have to report that.
Right. But, and then they have to stay, they can stay with us even if parents come and say, you have to come home with me.
No.
Okay.
No. If parents show up and say the kid has to come home with me, the kid has to go home with them unless CPS says no, they don't.
Okay. Okay.
So
Thank you.
legal guardians always have their rights unless someone else is saying, nope, we're stepping in, and that someone else is always CPS. So, and that's really important so the kids understand that too. You know, we legally have no standing to keep, you know, parents from taking their kids home. Only CPS can do that. Only Child Protective Services and DCS can do that. We cannot. We can
And their
encourage.
timelines have changed, so it's
What do you-
harder to get that. When you're calling their on-call to make those decisions.
Yeah.
So I think too, just reiterating, like making sure you get information from kids if there are some serious concerns and you're not getting a response from DCS or CPS, making sure you have their information. So if you need to make a safety call with the police, you can, and you can give them that information.
Well, and here's the other thing too, is if you have a kid who's making allegations of abuse or neglect, you always will call CPS first. You do not have to call the parents right away. So this was part of procedures, but we'll go back to that. In Indiana, there is a law that allows youth shelters or like Safe Place program, host home programs to provide services to kids without parental permission. Okay, and I used to think that there was a time limit, but I went back and looked at this this actual state statute, the language, and there really isn't a time limit there. Okay, so you can actually allow a kid to come to your program if they're making allegations, call Child Protective Services, wait for CPS to come out and make a determination of whether or not they can substantiate, and then take temporary guardianship of that child before you have to call the parent. Now, if the parent calls and says, I heard my kid was there, you can't lie to them. You have to tell them the truth. But you don't have to call the parents right away. Now, normally we encourage you to call parents if there's not an allegation, and you can have your coordinator, you can have a counselor, some of your experienced shelter staff make that call and let them know so that they're not worried, and frame that as a positive choice by the kid. But we don't immediately have to let parents know by law in Indiana. So we actually can have that kind of buffer time if kids are making allegations. That would be another thing that you want to make sure that you're telling your kids. Okay, so if you come in, I am going to go, and they ask, you know, we will be calling your parents and letting them know that you're here. We'll have that conversation. We will be there to mediate and make sure that they understand that this is a positive choice, and make sure that you have access to help and that kind of thing. And you can tell them, you know, if it's an allegation, we'll call CPS first before we call your parents. But again, you have to let them know those types of things, so that they have that expectation as well. All right, that's a good, thank you, Bridget. Okay, so there is a somewhere we were had a actual school presentation, and I don't know if anyone still has a copy of that. I mean, I know that some of you more experienced coordinators may have a copy of the school presentation that you use that you're willing to share with the new coordinators. If you are a new coordinator at an agency that has had the program for a while, you should have access to what that school presentation looks like. And it's, you know, it's always helpful to see what other folks are doing. So if you're willing to share that, you just reply all to some of these emails that I've been sending out so that everybody has copies of those, so that you guys know you're not starting from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a new coordinator and this is something that you haven't done before and you would like to either see what a presentation looks like or you would like help doing your first presentation, I'm sure we can hook you up with other coordinators who would be willing to help you do that. I think, you know, I don't know, I think we've got enough programs that it would not be too much of a hardship to do a little bit of travel once we get back to the face-to-face kinds of things. And then, as we talked about earlier, if you guys are doing your recorded session and giving that to the schools for kind of virtual presentations, and you're willing to share that and what that looks like, that also would be ideal and help folks understand what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. I'd be happy to share mine. And two, I have several that are not schools. So I go to my after school clubs, and after school clubs are also doing online stuff too now. So there's that avenue as well. Actually, that saved me a lot of times when I was having trouble getting into my schools before I created some partnerships. So feel free to ask.
Thank you, Bridget. Appreciate it. All right, so, you know, if you're trying to get into schools, sometimes it's easier to go to the principal. If you have really good relationships with your social workers or like health teachers, especially in high school and middle school, health teachers are great folks to contact because they have to talk about some safety issues. Those are good. Just depends upon the relationship that you have with the school and who's making those types of decisions. Sometimes I would I'd talk to the social worker, and then the social worker then would talk to the principal to get me permission to come in. So you just kind of have to know, ask around, and you know, who is the person that you need to talk to kind of to get permission to make sure that you're not stepping on toes. And sometimes you can find that out at like some of your community meetings or those types of things. Don't forget to go to your Catholic schools or your faith-based schools, your alternative schools, because those kids need to have this information just as much as your regular public schools. As Bridget mentioned, Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA, and in fact, if you have a Boys and Girls Club that is a safe place site, and you can train their staff to do the presentation, and they can do that presentation for you and then share those numbers with you as well. If you have fire stations and the fire departments and the fire folks are going out and talking about Fire Safety Month and the fact that they're a safe place and this how safe place works, give them that information. They can share that information. You can count those numbers as well. Again, you don't have to do this all. You can use other people to get this information out, as long as you are training them, as long as you have done a joint kind of presentation and kind of trust what they're going to do. So you can use volunteers to do presentations as well, as long as you've trained and then you've seen them do a presentation and you trust that they're giving out the correct information. So using the kind of like, again, captive audiences at the Boys and Girls Clubs, Girls Inc. or YMCAs, or if there's like other clubs in your area or sports programs, wherever you can get kind of those large audiences of kids, those are going to be ideal situations to share this. And you can actually train young people to give this presentation. I know many of you have youth groups who do kind of leadership, kind of peer education things. you can train your young people to share this information with younger kids. And so take advantage of that. Again, you just have to make sure that they have the right information. They're saying the things. If you're using a young person, I would always encourage that there is an adult present. Just so that you, because they may get questions that they can't answer and you will want to. But kids do like to hear this information from other kids. You just need to make sure that an adult is there as they're given that presentation too. When you're getting ready to go do a presentation, you want to make sure that you have your student cards, you have you've made arrangements for pre-post if at all possible. If you can do like I said, you can do the school and video presentations at like your high schools and maybe sometimes even your middle schools. But you want to make sure that they have the cards and get all that information. What am I missing, guys, in terms of presentations? We've talked about, video presentations. I'll show you.
The problem that I had is when I did after school presentations is that some of the students would be there for the pre-test, but wouldn't be there for the post-test.
Mhm.
So I had, of course, I didn't know at the time, but I put some that the pre-tests were done, but the post-tests weren't done, or some of the post-tests were done, but the pre-tests weren't done. So I had to go back in and take, the ones that weren't all done out. So that kind of messed up my numbers a little bit.
Yeah. You have to have both the pre and the post to put it into the database.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is to have the pre on one side and the post on the other.
Yeah.
So you always match. There's you can't if you have the pre on one side and the post on the other, then you know that it's the same kid doing the pre-post.
Well, I'm not quite sure because we had the schools. We sent them to the schools first, before I got there. And I wasn't aware that they didn't double-side it. so yeah, that happened. So yeah.
That makes it really, really challenging. Then you don't know how to match it up. So, if at all possible, you make the copies, you provide them with that. That way, at least you have that control over that piece. It's just these like little tricks, right? Which we learn, the hard way most of the time. So in addition, the kids are most important, but you also want to make sure that your law enforcement officers, that your local Department of Child Services, your other youth serving organizations are aware of Safe Place, and how your schools are aware of Safe Place and how it works, because a lot of times you'll get referrals for those. So anyone who's working with kids who are going to see kids on a regular basis should also know what Safe Place is, how it works, Rotaries and Kiwanis, those types of service clubs, because a lot of times they may help out with volunteer stuff or they may actually give you money. And so you really want the community to be aware of what this is. If you're going to community service provider, meetings and you get a chance to introduce what your agency does, please make sure not only you, but if your executive director is going out and talking, or your clinical folks are going out and talking, that they mention Safe Place. It doesn't have to be in detail. It's just that, and we also have the Safe Place program. And if anyone wants information about that, they can talk to you afterwards. But you just want to make sure that you're doing adult presentation or adult, outreach as well, so that they know about the program. And I would definitely target, like I said, law enforcement, schools, other service providers, youth serving organizations, because and even mental health facilities, healthcare facilities, because then they can make those referrals for you. So the pre-post is going to be in here. This is old. Look how old this is. My God, they don't even have the new sign up. That makes me cringe. Here we go. All right. So this is the protocol for your pre-post. I think this has been, maybe it has been updated. I'm not sure. But again, it talks about that more than 30 minutes, less than 30 kids, doing it on the kind of front back is the easiest way to do that, so that you have that. Holy cow, this is old. Look at this. This says, please contact me. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you guys are welcome to contact me. That email is not going to work, but wow. Okay. So here's again more direction on how to kind of complete the pre-post. Trying to get to it. This is the old copy. There's only 6 questions. This is not even right.
There's a newer version in the operations manual online because I pulled mine. So I know they've got some. They've got it somewhere.
So if you pulled that already, Bridget, can you share that with us then?
Sure, I'll find it. I'm pretty sure I pulled it, but even if I retyped it, I've got it somewhere. Okay.
I'll send the chapter out. Just know that this pre-post is not the most accurate one. A lot of the questions are the same. They actually got rid of a lot of questions. See, look, that even has the old sign on it. Oof. Sorry, it's like cringing around that stuff. Oh, so we were talking about the old sign and someone called it the creeper sign. It's like, well, yeah.
I kind of like to see a pre-post test for the younger kids.
Well, the new pre-post is only 6 questions. It's pretty darn easy. It's like, have you heard of Safe Place before? Do you know how Safe Place works? Would you use it if you had to?
You still identify the sign.
Yeah, you have to. I didn't, which it says Safe Place on it, so that's kind of a ridiculous question, but whatever. And then I don't remember what the other ones are.
Text for help question. There's only 6 questions.
Yeah, there are not many questions.
The only thing I would say too with your pre-post is explain to kids why they're doing it. In the presentation, if you're doing them, I have a lot of kids who want to do pre-post because it's the same thing. They'll do it all at one time. And I'm just like, we're gonna, and actually too, especially with your younger kids, like highlighting one side or the other and say, we're gonna do the highlighted side first. So you know that the pre-test was actually answered first and they did the post-test after. Because I know I've had that issue before. And it's kind of screwed me on some of the data before when I wasn't doing that as well. And so really having a conversation first to explain to kids why they're doing it. And I always tell them it's to evaluate how I'm doing my job. So if they feel like they have some power in that, they tend to answer me a little more honestly. Same thing with the Safe Place site evaluation. Like this really helps us figure that out. I know that's helped me with the pre-post, which can be harder when you have other people doing them for you to impress upon like doing it in the correct order, especially once kids, you know, immediately say, oh, it's the same thing on both sides. Yeah, this is why it's like that. Because otherwise they'll just do the whole thing or use it as a coloring sheet. So I get some cool pictures though on my pre-post.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So Carly, Cameron, you guys have anything to add on the actual outreach or presentation stuff?
I don't know if you mentioned this, but sometimes when I have trouble, like when the classrooms don't actually have availability for me to get into the classroom, I try to do just like a lunch outreach table at the high school, and then sometimes, not as often, but sometimes at the middle school. And that way I've had kids that have seen the sign but don't know what it is, and they come up and talk to me, or if they're just curious. Kids that I do know, they bring friends, so it's a good way to get extra people if you're not able to get into the classroom that month or anything.
That's a great, yeah. You guys can also do like I believe, yeah, it was actually Monroe County that did a banner at the city pool, and it just had Safe Place information up at the city pool, which is for recognition. We have a couple of agencies that have minor league baseball teams, And so they would do like information and, you know, like during the breaks or whatever, over the announcements about that. So you can get really creative about that. You know, what we had planned during the NSP week that got kind of postponed with the virus was a safe place night at the Pacer game. And you know, just again, other awareness stuff that we weren't able to do, but you can be creative. Cameron, you had something to add?
I forgot what I was gonna say.
What about your video?
Yeah, we make videos too. Yeah, like over here, we've been blessed enough to make professional videos with a thing called Punch Films. They do a lot of film projects around the world, and we send that out to the schools. And then I'm also there to answer questions. Also, teachers email me questions as well. I was gonna say something about outreach. Oh, I sent my our presentation, our PowerPoint, to the group email that you guys are getting attachments with. So that's, if anybody wants to look through that, that's kind of how we did ours. I did that actually when I was interning. But I would say not to put too much pressure on yourself, honestly, because it's very scary when you see that number to reach it. But then little by little, once you start chipping away throughout the year, it becomes doable. I know our number, I'm like, I'm never going to reach 11,000. Also, being honest with your school reps or people that you're reaching through the schools with, I tell them outright, like, we have to reach this many kids in order for this message to get out. And then I tell them the number, and they're like, okay, well, they're willing to help me because, you know, everybody's program is important and essential. But, you know, if you're just coming to them as a human being, like, look, I need to reach this number in order for our program to get funding, or, you know, whatever. And they're usually more receptive that way. So my boss taught me that. So I was like, you know, I didn't want to do that, but it works.
Yeah. Yeah, if you guys have shelters, then, you know, you can give the presentation to your shelter kids as they rotate through. That's another way to get, and that's a really good way to do pre-post as well, because you can get some of those numbers knocked out through your shelter kids, or you have other program kids. So, you know, I know that we talked about, like, if you have a rec program, you know, doing this with your teens at your rec programs or other programs, you can capture, and because they're in programs, you again can do your pre-post there, then try to do it at the schools, which is harder to manage. So just kind of be creative. We talk about outreach on a pretty regular basis at our quarterly meetings. And so, you know, we're always sharing information, and never hesitate to ask questions, because someone's doing something and can help you out. So I was again open this up. So we haven't had a lot of questions from some of the new folks. I don't know if that means because we're covering all of the answers, or you just are overwhelmed. Because I remember going to my first one and going, oh my God, it is a lot of information. And there are other opportunities for you guys to ask questions too. But I would open it up, see if anyone has any additional comments or questions right now. All right. If not, then let's take a break. Is 30 minutes enough time for lunch, guys? See some heads nodding. Yeah, is that going to be good? 30 minutes? All right, so let's come back at 10 after 1. Wait a minute. Let's come back at 10 after 1, and we will, I think a lot of what's left it will be like specific things to our Indiana programs. We'll look at the database and the website as well. So I think we've gotten through the real meat of this particular presentation. I'm actually going to end this session, but we can still use the same link to get back in. I'm going to end this session so that the recording stops, and then I'll start the recording for the second part, but we can still use this link to get back into the session for the second part of this. So with that, I will say go have lunch, take care of what you need to take care of, and I will see everybody back at 10 after 1 if that works.
All right, great, thank you.
All right, enjoy your lunch. Bon appetit.